Still Loading Podcast is brought to you by the wonderful people on Patreon. Amazing people like Ryan K., Kevin from the Bit by Bit Foundation, Gilmer, Matt, aka Stormageddon, Stephen P., and Mr. Biscuits have all been wonderful enough to support the show. So if you would also like to get your name read at the beginning of an episode, along with a bunch of other goodies, go over to patreon.com/stillloadingpod and check out everything it has to offer. On this episode of Still Loading, I still see Booster's face in my nightmares. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Koval, and today's episode, it is the first episode of Mario Month 2025, and this year's Mario Month, as you can kind of tell by the title of this episode, is going to be RPG themed. And actually, if you pay attention on social media, I probably hinted, or at least put, I don't know what I'm going to do for the advertising campaign for this yet. We're recording this in 2024. I haven't even freaking thought about that yet. But this Mario Month is going to be all Mario RPG games. We are covering Super Mario RPG, Legend of the Seven Stars, Paper Mario, Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga, Paper Mario 1,000 Year Door, and Mario and Luigi Partners in Time. So 5 RPG games back to back to back, a whole lot of Mario RPG goodness. And to kick off Mario Month this year, I am joined by returning guests. Actually, both of them have appeared in Mario Month episodes before. Last year, one of them was on part of episode 300, so we'll start off with this wonderful individual. I am joined first off by Matt Storm from the Fun and Games Podcast and the Reignite Podcast. Matt, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Yes, you mean the victor of the last Mario
That's right.
draft.
That's right.
I won with
the
my
only
Mario
Super
game.
Mario draft so far. And you know what? I'm going to be bold enough to say the only one on the internet.
Wow. Yeah, probably. I mean, I imagine. But yes, it's nice to be back. Last time I was on the show, we talked about a more spooky game, although this game does have its spooky moments. But yeah, I'm happy to be back. I love this game, and I love chatting on your show, so it's great to be here.
Thank you for agreeing to be on. Always a pleasure to have you back on the show. And joining us as the second guest, the third wheel, though he's not going to be a third wheel. We're not going to treat him as a third wheel, but there's 3 of us in this little triangle of Mario fandom. Eric from the Unlockables Podcast. Eric, how are you doing today?
I have lots of practice being the third wheel, but no, Josh, I really appreciate you having me back on. I love coming on for Mario Month. I love coming on the Still Loading Podcast. It's great. I do have a confession that I have to tell you. However, my name is not actually Eric. It is Heart Music Note ! And I'm actually a spirit from another dimension, just inhabiting a wooden doll podcasting tonight. So yes, this is my true form. I chose to reveal it here.
There's some type of boner joke in there with a wooden doll, but I don't know how to really.
I don't got it. Neither of us are crazy.
I'm not really quite sure how to loop that in, but there's something in there somewhere.
Yeah. Somebody will make it in the comments.
Exactly right. And I think actually it's. You were on, Eric, for a segment on the 300th episode, one of the little interviews I did. But I think prior to that, I think I've had you on for a Kingdom Hearts episode, but you've been on for a lot of Mario Month stuff now that I'm thinking about it.
I've been on Mario Month the last 2 years. So I was on 2 years ago. I think we did Super Mario Galaxy.
Yes.
And then last year we did Mario Kart Super Circuit. So yeah. Man, I love Mario Month. I love Mario. So I'm always happy to come on for
apparently
a Mario Month
you've just become a staple of Mario Month, it seems.
that matches with my background. So I'm happy to do it.
There we go. Well, we are here. All 3 of us are gathered here today to talk about, well, that sounds like a eulogy, but we're gathered here to talk about Super Mario RPG, Legend of the Seven Stars, and also its remake that came out just a little bit ago, about a year ago or so, 2 years-ish. We're here to talk about Super Mario RPG. So as per usual, we always like to start off with our personal histories and whatnot. And we're going to start off with you, Matt. When did you first play this game? How did you first kind of get into it and your kind of background with it?
Sure. So when I started playing video games, and I've talked on other podcasts that like the Super Nintendo era was kind of like when I realized I was a capital G gamer, as we like to say. Nobody should say that. But like when I started to like recognize that I liked video games and I liked playing video games, and that it was more than just kind of a little hobby, and that I was becoming more invested in it. And it was also the Super Nintendo when I kind of learned more about RPGs as a genre. I wouldn't really understand RPGs as a broad genre probably till the PlayStation and Final Fantasy VII, but I started to. And one of the more formative RPGs for me, besides Chrono Trigger, was Super Mario RPG. I remember, so I got a Genesis first, I think around when Sonic 3 and Sonic 3 and Knuckles came out. And I didn't have a Super Nintendo. I had a very good friend of mine, my best buddy Neil, had a Super Nintendo. And so I played Super Nintendo at his house a lot. When we were kids, we'd hang out in his living room where the Super Nintendo was and play it a bunch. And when Super Mario RPG came out, we were both big Mario fans, played a ton of Super Mario World and the Super Mario All-Stars pack. And when Super Mario RPG came out, he was so excited. We played it. And I remember one of the first nights we played it, I slept over his house, and he eventually fell asleep, and I stayed up all night playing, which was not great for me, especially since I was in Karo Sewers at the time. And the Bellome stuff to this day still wigs me out a little bit, especially in the sewers, because it's kind of a little spooky. The music is spooky, and Bellome is like such a weird character, which we'll talk more about later. But I ended up falling in love with it. And so I think that holiday, if I'm remembering correctly, or my next birthday, I asked for a Super Nintendo. I got a Super Nintendo when they released the Square upgrade version of it, the Square console, which came out towards the back end of the run. And I got it, Donkey Kong Country, and Super Mario RPG. I've been obsessed with this game pretty much since it came out. It's one of my favorite RPGs, definitely one of my favorite Mario games, and I think in like the top 3 video game soundtracks of all time for me. Like I have every song on this soundtrack memorized. I know it very well. And so I've kind of been obsessed with it since. And then I think it was last year, the remake came out, and I played that as soon as it came out, loved it. They had a ton of streamlining. There's stuff I loved about it. There were a few things I didn't love about it, but all in all, I think it's a great way to play this game. And over the years since this came out in, I think it was the late 90s, it must have been the late 90s, mid to late 90s. This has been my depression game. And what I mean is when I'm feeling sad for any reason, something happens, or, just having a rough day or a bad day at work or whatever, I pop this game in and I immediately feel better. Like it's just one of those games that's been with me so long that I always feel better when I'm playing it. I remember this must have been in the mid to late 2000s. I had lost I think it was the late 2000s, like the 2010s or maybe 11. I'd lost my job. And when I got home, it was around the time when this game had come out on the Wii Virtual Console. And so I literally that weekend just downloaded it and played it like straight through to try and feel better. So yeah, I have a long history with this game. I was very excited when you asked me to come on and talk about it. I've talked about it on other podcasts as well. So I'll try and keep the material fresh. But this one is really close to my heart. So there's not going to be a ton of objectivity from me because this one means a ton to me.
Well, we're not here for objectivity. We're here to talk about like video games are art. They are subjective. We should talk about the things we love and why we love them. Like, I don't know. I know it's kind of one of the reasons you've talked about it before on when you do your plugs and everything about when you do to actually kind of segue into a small plug for your show, the side quests portion of your Fun and Games podcast feed. Like there's so much negativity about games online just in general, like even take out the conversations about different socio things going on, all that other all that stuff. Like there's just so much negativity about games. It's people just like to shit on games. So it's nice to have a space just to talk about why we love something, and in a long format, a long form format, whatever the hell I'm trying to say. Just so you should never feel ashamed to talk about how much you love this game, because it is like, spoiler, I think it's pretty wonderful as well.
Awesome. Well, I'm happy to be here to do that. But yeah, that's basically my history with it. I've never stopped playing it. There are some games from my childhood that I don't play for a while and then revisit much later. This one, I wouldn't say I played it yearly, but I mean, I definitely have played it at least every 5 years since it came out, if not more often than that.
And also, just real quick, shout out to the Wii Virtual Console, man. I miss that thing.
Absolutely.
I understand it was like not cost effective for the consumer compared to like what Netflix is now, even though the variety is significantly less. I don't know. Just shout
you
out
call
to
it
the
Netflix?
Yeah, Netflix.
That's incredible. I've never heard that before.
That's very,
That's
very
so good.
I can't even take credit for it. I heard it because before when it first came out, it was only NES, so it was Netflix.
Yeah, Netflix.
Yeah. That's so good.
I thought of Earthbound, but yeah, that works too.
Also, fun fact, if you go digging around for my personal YouTube channel, not the Fun and Games YouTube channel, the first game I ever streamed was Super Mario RPG. It's not good.
Very cool.
The video quality is bad. I don't sound good. My microphone's bad, but it was the first game I ever streamed. I think it was around that time when I got laid off. And I was like, well, I'll stream on Twitch. That'll give me something to do. And so I streamed several like episodes of it and then fell off and never finished it. Maybe I should go back to it. I just pick up where I left off with no explanation and better video quality and like the remake, and people be like, wait a minute.
I want that so bad.
Just a VOD that's several years later. That'd be amazing.
I should do that. I should just start it with a few moments later for like SpongeBob, and then it's
so
just
funny.
the remake where I left off and just act like
and
nothing
playing
changed.
the remake even better. Like that.
that would be
And just your whole setup's better. You know, better camera now, better microphone. Just such a jarring leap. That'd be so funny.
Huge.
Oh, that'd be so funny. Well, Eric, throwing it over to you, what's your personal history with Super Mario RPG?
Yeah, so I won't pretend to keep any secrets either. I'm on the same side as both of you. I unequivocally love this game. It's so fantastic. I think my history goes back to probably the Super Nintendo was the first console that I ever had. So it holds a very special place in my heart. It's kind of when I think of video games, like stuff from the Super Nintendo is the first thing that pops up. So all of that amazing, the Super Nintendo art style from like Super Mario World and Super Mario RPG and all that stuff is very much synonymous with the way I think about video games. And I'm not sure, I can't claim specifically if this was the first RPG that I ever played, because as you get older, your memories kind of like compress and all, like that time period is just kind of like a blur. All that stuff was kind of happening at once in my mind. So I do know that when I was that age, I was playing Super Mario RPG, Pokemon, and Final Fantasy IX, all games that I consider very pivotal RPGs for me, even though Pokemon RPG Lite, still RPG elements. But I remember first seeing this game at a family party, and it was my uncle on my mom's side. So her brother was still living with my grandparents at the time. And his room was like the coolest room. It was like you go in there and it was like a wonderland, because he had like a wall of NES games. He had the Super Nintendo. So he had like a wall of Super Nintendo games. And me and my younger cousin would just like go in there. He was very gracious enough to like let us play all of his games and ruin all his save data. And he's the coolest uncle. So shout out to my uncle there. And this was the first time I saw the game was at his house. And I remember I was just so enamored with it that I was just like, Uncle, can I please like borrow this game for a while and just go home and play it? And he let me borrow it and take it home and play it. And I just remember becoming like absolutely obsessed with it. I think it was definitely probably the first RPG that I ever beat like all the way through. And it was really kind of introduced me to that genre of video games that is now my favorite genre of any genre of video games. I just love the way it took something familiar that I knew in Mario with the platforming and, you know, all the characters and stuff, and it turned into something that was so unique at the time. I was like, I didn't know Mario would go on an adventure that was portrayed in this way. I thought it was just playing through levels and jumping, and, you know, the narrative in Super Mario World's pretty light. It's just you're traveling through the world trying to rescue Yoshi eggs and rescue the princess at the end. But this had a whole like narrative arc for a lot of those characters in that world, and it was just so stunning that, yeah, it really has stuck with me. I didn't play it for a long time. Like I played it, same thing as Matt. I probably played it a lot over the course of the years. And there was a period like around like high school that I didn't play it for like a stretch of 10 years. And then the first time I actually replayed it was for King of Games 1996. And it was a game in that tournament. Go check that out if you want to see how it fared. And then after playing it again, it just kind of, I was a little bit nervous playing it again because, not having played it for so long and how games age, and you're like, oh, if I go back to this thing, is it going to hold up to what my nostalgia tells me it was? And I shouldn't have doubted for a second, because I loved every second of my replay. So much so that I also did an episode on it, short little essay episode on it for my own show. And you can go check that out if you'd like to. And yeah, I picked up the remake when it came out. I thought the remake was fantastic. Same thing as Matt. There were a couple like small little things that I didn't really like, but overall I found it a really faithful package to what the original was that made some quality of life improvements. So yeah, Super Mario RPG is awesome, and I will hear none of the smack talk about it.
I'm with both of you that I love this game. I mean, we're not even going to beat around the bush. We all three of us love this. I differ though in that I have no nostalgia for this game. My first home console, as I've said before, was the Nintendo 64. So I missed out on a lot of the stuff on the Super Nintendo, and because of that, I missed out on a lot of the classics that people now have, or that people always reference, Chrono Trigger. I mean, I've played them all since, but like, talking about did I play them during my formative years, that 10 to like 15 year, 10-year-old to 15-year-old age gap, those 5 to 6 years where games suddenly like are everything to you. And like, those are the games that stick with you the most. Or at least I shouldn't say for everyone, at least for me, it was like that. I feel like that's a very common thing though. So I missed out on it. I didn't get to first play it until the mid 2010s, like 2014, 2013, like not all that long ago. I got into video game collecting after, enjoying AVGN, and then that kind of progressed from there on out. And that's when I actually first heard about it. I'm like, what do you mean there's a Mario RPG? At that time, I didn't know that Paper Mario was an RPG game, because that's a whole nother story for the Paper Mario episode next week. But had no idea, and I had no idea it was for the Super Nintendo. I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. Oh, and Square made it. What is this? So first getting into game history and game collecting and hearing about this game, I'm like, this is so odd, like how this is so unique and different. I'm so interested in this, and I sought to get a copy of it, and I do actually own an original copy of this game, complete in the box, in my collection.
Very cool.
Nice. It is somewhere at my parents' house right now, so I can't get it just yet because I've moved within the last couple months, so the game collection is a little scattered right now. But I do own a copy of this complete in box, and played through it before I moved, played through it, and really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed my time with it. It didn't necessarily like, how can I put this? I think this is a little bit of like a small segue into about like a history with the podcast. I don't think I really truly started appreciating games again until I started the pod. How can I put this? I feel like there's ebbs and flows of my appreciation for games, like where games affect me emotionally. And when I played this the first time, I was kind of more at the bottom of that, where like I played games because they were fun, but it never really resonated on an emotional level with me. When I replayed it for this show, it resonated on an emotional level with me. Like I really enjoyed my replay of the remake, or not my replay, my first play of the remake of this game, and also seeing the comparisons from the original to this. So that's kind of how I came to this game. I played it for the first time only maybe a decade ago for the first time. I don't know exactly when, 2014, 2015, could have been 2016. I don't really remember. And then I didn't touch it again until I got the remake and to cover it for this game. So that's kind of how it all started with this. So yeah, that's my own history with Super Mario RPG.
I mean, I totally get that. I think, no, I just wanted to like comment on your thing about reframing games once you're playing them for the show. I think there's a lot of video games that I have re-experienced. I mean, I had this experience actually with Eric on his show, not to shamelessly plug Unlockables, but we did an episode on Sonic Adventure 2, and I hadn't replayed it since I was a kid. And like, I use the term kid loosely. I was, in high school, college, whatever age that was. I don't know. When you're over 40, it all blurs together. But like, I liked the game when I was a kid, but like replaying Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 this year, I had such an positive emotional reaction to both games, and like this like kind of nostalgia that I just felt like visceral. Like nostalgia is so heavy, it's almost like you're swimming through it, kind of a thing.
Mhm.
Like, and so like it was just really fun to experience that, because I've replayed those games before, but I don't think I connected to them in that way, because then I had this excuse to talk about them in places and fight with Sonic haters about them. Not Eric, other people, but maybe a certain
could you be
famous
talking
Sonic.
about?
Yeah, right. But like, in all seriousness, like it's fun to have that critical lens now. Some of the articles I've written this year and last year for the Patreon for Fun and Games also is the same thing. Like, I'm revisiting these games with this more analytical eye, and still love them, but really now being able to pick apart why I love them. I had a similar experience replaying Rocket Knight Adventures for the first time, which is one of my first time in a long time, which is one of my favorite Genesis games growing up, and I hadn't played it since till in like a decade or more. And then they re-released it this year on Switch with 2 other games, the sequel and like an interquel. And yeah, I totally relate to that, Josh. And I'd never really had a framework for it, but you're absolutely right. Like, having a project you're proud of and to kind of force your games that you grew up with through it that you love kind of gives you like a new love, because you can look at it a little differently.
I'm glad you mentioned that too, Matt, because I think that specifically the type of stuff we do when we're creating content, there's a lot of pressure to like play games in order to have something to talk about when you're creating content. And that tends to be like, oh, I have to play like new experiences or the new things that are coming out, or I have this backlog that I'm just trying to clear one game off and move to the next one. And I mentioned this in one of my my end of the year episode, which will be out by the time this one comes out. I was about to say I haven't recorded it yet, but it will be out. I talked about I think there's value in replaying video games and not just trying to play all the new experiences and clear everything off from your backlog, because I think when you are playing games with a more critical eye and then you do this kind of content creation thing for a couple years, I've gone back and replayed things and found that there were like different things that I appreciated about them from what my thoughts on them were, and I hadn't played them in 5 years. I've been doing that for the last 2 years with my Kingdom Hearts series, going back and playing games that I hadn't played in the last 5 years with an entirely different lens and a lease on life, because my familial situation is so different. So I think this episode specifically, if you take anything away from that, is like, you should go back and play things that you have experienced before, especially if you're in this space, because I think there's something to be gained at looking at a game you already played and having played subsequent games after it. You learn things from each game that you play and how to like evaluate and analyze them. So I wanted to put that in there, because I'm a big proponent of like not just rushing from game to game, but going back and replaying things that you've played before.
Absolutely. And I think, like, in a weird sense, going back and playing it, like, you've changed since the last time you've played any particular game. Ever since I hate this cliche, but it's one of those, I think one of the most annoying things about becoming a parent is all those stupid fucking cliches that you hear. Oh, your world changes, this and that. It's true. And it's annoying that it's true, because it's like, I can't think of a better way to articulate that just yet, because so everyone else is going to hear it 1,000 times and be like, yeah, your world changes, whatever. It's like, no, you don't understand.
Get ready, you're not going to sleep for like 4 years. It's just like, whatever.
And so, but the reason I say that though is now when I play games and there's something involving children, it hits on a completely different emotional level.
Oh my god, yeah, 100%.
Like, it's not the same, but ever since getting a dog, it's the same thing. Like, 100%. I played, what was it? A Plague Tale for the first time.
Oh, man.
The opening of that game, it's brutal having to do with a dog. I won't talk about it, but like, I almost turned the game off. I ended up finishing it because it was for a podcast, and I really did end up loving the game. The opening scene ruined me. Whereas it might still have been upsetting without having a pet, but having a pet, you're like, you're putting your child, your pet, your family member, whoever it is, into that situation. You're like relating in that way, and it just makes things hit so much harder.
Agree. Mm-hmm. Sorry to derail.
No, not at all. I mean, it's all kind of it's kind of like what the whole thing with this show is. Like, we're not just talking about like the game itself. Like, I always like with Still Loading is I try to do a little bit of history. It's a games review show with some history thrown in and a lot of nostalgia. Like, I never asked my guests to be experts on a game. I asked them to love them, and that's all that I really care about. And that's why we're here, because we all love this game. So let's dive into talking about this. Super Mario RPG originally came out on March 9th, 1996 in Japan, came out a few months later in North America on May 13th, 1996. It was developed by Square, now Square Enix, whatever you want to call them, published by Nintendo, directed by Chihiro Fujioka and Yoshihiko Meikawa, produced by, of course, Shigeru Miyamoto. I have a handful of things that I dug up when I was doing research for this, but I think I can weave them in pretty well through our different topics that we're going to be going through. The only thing I want to bring up with at the top of the episode was development started, as far as I could tell, in early 94, because I found an interview that took place in October of 1995, and they said that the development had started the beginning of the previous year. So sometime in early 1994 is when the game started development. So it was that's a pretty long development time for a Super Nintendo game. But it was also an RPG, so I guess it's not that surprising. About a 2-year turnaround time. Development was almost entirely handled by Square, but Nintendo did check in with them periodically, especially Miyamoto, because they were one of the things they were going back and forth with when trying to determine the gameplay style is like what makes this RPG feel like a Mario game, not just an RPG. And we'll kind of get into that as we discuss the gameplay. But I think we should start off actually with said gameplay. We'll go into all the visuals and music towards the end. And the story, there's not... do either of you have anything to say about the story? The story is pretty light, in my opinion. I don't really have much to add to it. But do either of you have anything to say about the story?
I mean, mostly just that the writing is superb. It's very funny. Yes. It's very cheeky. Like, the narrative itself is pretty boilerplate, but I think, it's, friendship conquers all, unlikely partnerships. But like this game, I think most importantly, narratively, this game started the trope of Bowser actually not being the villain. And in the same way that King Dedede now is for Kirby, he's just kind of an antagonist, like an anti-hero sometimes. Like he aligns with Mario often in the games, even in those games he starts out as the villain, and that like kind of comical try hard, I just want people to like me persona that Jack Black solidified in the recent movie basically was born from this game. It started here, and I love that. It's one of my favorite things about this game is that we got to see not only dynamic portrayals of classic characters, but even like the villains and stuff and that world. But yeah, I mean, otherwise the story is pretty much bad guy, bigger bad guy. Mario saves the day, rescues the princess. Princess doesn't want to be held up in the castle, helps save the day, and then other people join, new characters, old characters. Like, you're right. I don't think it's super deep on any level, but it's definitely entertaining and well written.
Any thoughts from you, Eric?
Yeah, I think that I think there are some narrative things in here that I like, and I will agree. I think on its surface level, oh no, the Smithy gang has destroyed the Star Road, and now we can't wish anymore. Like that's pretty standard RPG stuff, and I feel like that would fit into like a Mario world without you having to like blink an eye or like contort your brain to like make it work or anything like that. But there are some narrative arcs in this game that I do think are pretty good and I do really appreciate. I mean, Matt mentioned Bowser becoming this game kind of influencing what Bowser would go on to become, which I think is incredible. But even Bowser himself kind of goes on like a little bit of a journey in this game to like where he's evicted from his castle, and then you run into him naturally in the world throughout like traveling through the levels, and he's marching with his Koopa troop to like retake his castle, and every time you see him there's like less people until like all of his people have just like abandoned him, and then you run into him like at the booster tower, and he's thinking to himself, he's like, oh, if I work with Mario, maybe we can like get my castle back or whatever. But the only way he can bring himself to like do that in his mind is being like, okay, Mario, you're going to be in my Koopa troop now. And that's the only way Bowser can justify actually working with Mario. And then later when you get to like Monstro Town and Bowser like runs into some of his old like subordinates there, like he runs into like a Goomba who's like opened up a shop and has like a family, and Bowser's like genuinely happy for him that he's like started a new life and has like a new family and doesn't just like tear his stuff up. So Bowser kind of goes on like a really cool narrative arc where it's like, he's not such a bad guy after all. So I really like that. Same thing with the newer character Mallow. he has a really convincing arc where he starts off as kind of like a scaredy crybaby, and by the end he like finds courage to like be the hero that he knows he is, and like kind of stand side by side with Mario as like a hero of the land. So there are just some really good like narratives that I think are pretty convincing and happen pretty naturally over the course of a relatively short game by RPG standards. But I don't think anything about the story. There was nothing in the story where I would just be like, this doesn't feel like Mario. This doesn't feel like it'd be out of place for like Mario. It feels natural. And I think Square and Nintendo did a good job of making it feel like, yes, this is an RPG, but it is also a Mario game. And I think we'll touch on that when we get to gameplay.
Man, I have a couple things to add to what you both said. One, in terms of the character arcs and whatnot, there's a lot of stuff that they did in this game to show those character arcs in really kind of subtle, interesting ways too, not just through the storytelling. One of the things that I thought was really interesting is you mentioned Malo, Eric. The first time you meet him, and just to kind of go with that crybaby nature, he falls and like skins. Well, how can you skin a Cloud's knee? But he hurts his knee.
Right.
He skins a knee, and he cries. And when he cries, thunder and lightning. A lightning storm happens, and then it stops. The next time you see that happen, did you either of you keep track of the next time you noticed that happening?
No, I don't think so. Is it in the Cloud Kingdom?
It's in the Cloud Kingdom when he finally gets reunited with his parents. You don't see it. You see him walk into the castle. Mario stays outside without him. He's finally going to see his parents after he just rescued them from the bad. I forget the name of the lady who was impersonating him. And Mario doesn't do anything except he puts up an umbrella. And then it rains for a split second, and then he puts the umbrella away, and him and Malo and his family come out. And that's a really subtle way to be like, that wasn't sad tears like you saw in the beginning. Those were happy tears. Like they were all crying out of happiness. I thought that was a really subtle, cool way to do storytelling, character building, in just that little segment,
Yeah, totally.
Another thing you were mentioning before, Matt, about how kind of Bowser's the character arc for Bowser and how Jack Black portrays him. I think one of the things that I notice about the vibes of this game, I think one of the most important things about this game specifically is that it set the vibe going forward of what Mario RPG games kind of gear towards. This kind of happy-go-lucky kind of slapstick comedic, like Paper Mario's like this, the Mario and Luigi games are like this, and now that I'm finally playing them for the first time, I can actually say that because I hadn't really touched them up until doing this series for Mario Month. They all kind of have a similar writing style. It's not one-to-one, but they all kind of go for that goofy, zany slapstick, and honestly it reminds me of Looney Tunes a little bit. And what I mean by that is, like, remember the Ralph Wolf and Sam Sheepdog sketches or like cartoons, the shorts?
Yep.
How like they have a job to do. This is what I'm supposed to do. They literally have a punch card in. Ralph Wolf punches in. He's like, all right, it's my time to be a wolf and try to eat sheep. And Sam Sheepdog punches in. Is like, all right, it's my turn. It's I'm getting paid to be a sheep or a sheepdog, and I'm gonna watch these sheep. It feels like that relationship, but with Mario and Bowser. Like, all right, I'm the villain. It's time for me to clock in and be a villain. And Mario's the same way. Time for me to clock in and be a hero. They don't go with that gag, as far as I know, so far in the games. I'll see as I progress through these RPG games, but at least in these first three that I've played, the time I'm recording this, I'm currently making my way through Superstar Saga. You'll hear about my thoughts on that in a couple of weeks, but it kind of feels to me like that's the vibe they're going for in this game. Do you agree with? Do either of you agree with this kind of Looney Tunes vibe that I feel with this?
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. I mean, like, well, for also example, the slapstick in this game, like, so Mario and Luigi, but in this game just Mario, but in the later games, Mario and Luigi don't communicate using words. So in this, Mario doesn't speak. He's the classic silent protagonist, but the gag is that he can somehow shapeshift into other characters and impersonate them to tell narrative. And like, my favorite part is when you rescue the Chancellor from the Mushroom Kingdom after Mac is his name. I don't care what his name was in the remake. He was Mac the Knife.
Mac.
It was a good joke. mad that it was removed, but anyway, not bitter. When you beat Mac and then rescue the Toads, they ask what's going on, and so Mario explains it. But when he turns into Bowser to explain it, like all the Toads jump back and freak out and hide because they think it's actually Bowser. Like, but it's never explained that he can do this, and he can only do it when he's explaining what's going on. It's really great. And then in the later Mario and Luigi games, and I know you'll get into this more when you cover it, but like Mario and Luigi speak Italian gibberish, and
I love it so much.
And
I love it so much.
And Brothership, which I'm playing now, I think it's the new voice actors doing it, as far as I know, the ones who were hired for Wonder and beyond. But in those original games, it's Charles Martinet speaking to himself as Mario and Luigi in gibberish, and it's great. It's some of my favorite dialogue in games because they do it, and then everyone goes, "Oh well, of course Bowser kidnapped the princess. Thank you for telling me." Like, we don't understand, we don't speak that language. Never. It's just they get it. They know what they're talking about. It's the best. And so those two things alone, just how they communicate in this game and the ones beyond. Or even in Paper Mario, like it's often him like waving something around or like falling flat on the ground. Like it's always physical comedy on some level used to communicate in these games. And I think that absolutely is also very Looney Tunes-esque.
Yeah, I really like the punch card analogy because, yeah, Mario and Bowser golf and have parties and drive go-karts. So they do all this other stuff. So, but they do got to punch in and they got to go to work sometimes. It makes complete sense. Piggybacking off of what Matt said, and maybe you guys can correct me on this, but this is also kind of, we talked about how like this game kind of defined what Bowser could be. This is my first time really encountering, like, Mario doesn't have a kind of like narrative like Bowser and Mallow. He's obviously Mario. One of the cool things they do in this game is they make him a Mario that's like famous, right, across the world. Like everybody knows who he is. And I think that's a really cool, nice touch where it's like, you're not the real Mario. And then you jump and people are like, holy shit, this is actually Mario.
Everyone knows that he's Mario. He just has to jump. And they're like, holy fuck.
Yeah, they're like, oh my God, it's actually Mario. He's actually here. But it also is the first game that I kind of encountered. I mean, I had Super Mario All-Stars, I played Super Mario World, I played all the old Mario games. This is the first game where it feels like Nintendo allowed Mario to have like a little bit of personality with some of that slapstick humor. And I agree with Matt. That scene in Mushroom Kingdom is it's so hilarious the way he enacts that scene. And that does carry into the later Mario and Luigi games. And I would say even some of his like blockbuster 3D platformer games where he's allowed to get into more like a little more zany situations. They're not just like sterile 2D side-scrolling platformers. It's like he's getting into kind of like some crazy situations. So I think it was good to like for Nintendo to like let Mario kind of go and be a little more zany and be a little more wacky, and they've kind of carried that forward ever since.
There's one Easter egg that I'm going to spoil. If you don't want to be spoiled for this game, because narratively we're not going to spoil it, I don't think, because we don't care to really. But there's no
narrative really. It's the
right.
I mean, there is, but like there's no earth-shattering character. No. Like it's not Last of Us 2 ending type thing. You know what I mean? Like
I already ruined Bowser's arc, so it's fine.
Yeah, it's true. But there's one Easter egg that I found because I always do shit like this in RPGs. But in Mushroom Kingdom, either before you rescue it or after you rescue it, there's an older, what looks like a grandma mushroom person and a little grandson mushroom person outside. She's like hanging up clothes and stuff, and he's running in circles in like a square-shaped circle because you can only move in a grid in this game ish. But is running in circles outside and just constantly nonstop. And she comments on how he has endless energy. You can jump on his head. If you jump on his head while he's running in circles, you'll ride him for a little while. And then Mario will jump off him and then pass out for a second and then get up and shake his head because he was made dizzy by standing on this mushroom boy running in circles. That is like the perfect example of what Josh is talking about, of the slapstick kind of Looney Tunes nature. And there are other stuff like that. Like when you first meet Gino, what happens there? Like there's a ton of slapstick in this game, and it's often with Mario on the receiving end. That'll later become Luigi's job to get clobbered a lot, but in this game it happens to Mario a bunch, and it's always hysterical.
Especially in Booster's Castle, man. Booster's Castle is one of like, I love that area, and we'll get to that in just a moment. One other point I wanted to bring up though, just talking about kind of like the overall, like, I guess aesthetic of the world, not visual aesthetic. Like we'll get to the visuals and music later on, but like the kind of overall vibe and aesthetic, tie it into kind of like what your show has done a lot, Eric, with Kingdom Hearts. Square has a knack of taking things, and I mean this as a compliment, like sincerely, where they have a knack of taking things from different properties, infusing their own identity into it, and still somehow making it feel like, yeah, that belongs.
Yep.
When I, like, for example, Kingdom Hearts 2, Pirates of the Caribbean should not fucking work. But it does. Like, I'm sure some people would disagree. I don't think it's that jarring. I think they somehow were able to make it work.
If you see it in 3 and compare it to 2, it's a little more jarring. But yeah, I don't have any issues with it.
But like, it's the same thing with this, where like they created so many unique and goofy characters and creations for this game. Like Gino, it feels very Square Enix in terms of his design, like his visual design and everything like that. Mallow, even to a lesser extent, but you can tell that's very much them being like, well, this would be like something in a Mario world. Gino feels like something like you could see Gino in a Final Fantasy, like maybe a more like toonish one, but you could see Gino in like a Final Fantasy. And they have a couple other monster designs like that, but like even just looking at their enemy list, like the crabs that have like the spiky shells and everything, and those look like it's the eyes, man. Like the way they do stuff like that, it just works like in a Mario design. But at the same time, it feels just far enough that you wouldn't see it in like a standard Mario game, but it doesn't feel too out of place either. Like I'm continuously impressed by how Square, not only with this game, but as obviously with Kingdom Hearts, how they're able to kind of meld their own style of RPG and kind of fantasy and all this other stuff, and they're able to adapt it so well to whatever source material they are trying to turn into an RPG. I'm not saying they do it well all the time, but at least in the games that I've played, I've been very impressed with how they do that. And I think Mario RPG is a great example of them finding ways to do that. I mean, look at even the example like Bahamut. Like instead of Bahamut from Final Fantasy, you have this very kind of like, it looks like the lava dragon from the Mario games, you know? Not one-to-one, but it's kind of similar.
Yeah, for sure. And we even get like, Culex is basically a Final Fantasy boss. He's not, although for years I thought he was. I was convinced that he was from another Final Fantasy game. But he looks like one, and like the fight is designed like one, and there's crystals. And yeah, I think also something I think Nintendo's really good at is partnering with the right studios. You think about what Rare has done to reform, like completely change Donkey Kong's identity. And like they basically created the modern version of Donkey Kong with Donkey Kong Country. But even like what Ubisoft has done in recent years with the Mario and Rabbids games, which I scoffed at when they were first announced. But that first game is incredible. And I haven't finished the second one, but like I love what I played. Like they really understood these characters. And I think it's Nintendo, or even like the Hyrule Warriors games, like, or like think about what Capcom did with some of my favorite handheld Zelda games, like Minish Cap. Like, I think if Nintendo is willing to let these companies do what they do best and not really micromanage, they want to do these legendary game franchises justice. And I think this is a great example of it. And Nintendo has done it a bunch of times. It's not always perfect, but often it's done well because there's an appreciation for these characters just from them being around in the industry as long as they have, and they want to do right by them.
I think Matt hits the nail on the head. I think Square as a company recognizes that, I mean, they've built their games off the backs of memorable characters. They have a stable of memorable characters that people know and love and identify with. So I think when they do things, when they work with like, I think when they do things and they work with people that they're borrowing like designs and stuff from, I think they go a long way to make sure that they're doing justice to the things that they are borrowing from. And they do a pretty good job. They're pretty collaborative overall when they work with, I mean, Disney can't be an easy company to work with, but like you said, I think they do a fantastic job of making that world feel like it makes sense for the most part together. Like nothing is super jarring, even when you do see things like Donald Duck standing next to Jack Sparrow. And yeah, I think it's the same. I think it's the same thing with Mario. There's nothing in the game where I feel like I think they did a good job of, and I'm sure Miyamoto came back and gave his notes because that's his baby. He's not going to allow it to be portrayed in any way other that's satisfying to him. And I think we'll talk about in gameplay too. He did come back and give some notes on some of the original stuff that they wanted to do that I'm glad they went back and changed because it wouldn't have made sense for a Mario game. So I think despite all the troubles that Square has had over the years, and them not really being thought of as highly as they were back in the day, they do characters very well, even in games that aren't received as well, or the people say aren't received as well, but you remember their characters.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think to tie this part of the episode all together, to bring it back to Looney Tunes a little bit, there's an interview that you can hear with Chuck Jones, the animator, talking about like, when you're doing animation, you have essentially complete creative freedom. You can do almost whatever you want. So what matters when you're making those things is what are your disciplines? How do you limit yourself in order to keep things interesting and keep things focused? And that's kind of what Miyamoto did with this. How do you what are their disciplines? How do you make something feel Mario-esque when it may not be inherently Mario? And what is the answer to that? I couldn't tell you. I'd have to really spend time looking at every single boss and be like, how could they have done this wrong and where did they go right? Which we could do, but now we'd be here for another 5 hours doing that.
True.
But that would be a really interesting art. Like any games journalist, just give me throw me a Instagram, like a Blue Sky tag on there. If you want to do something like that, that would be a really interesting thing to that'd be a really interesting thing to read about, how every Super Mario RPG boss and where it could have gone wrong and gone too far into the Square realm, but how they kept it in the Mario realm. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
That's a different topic for a different day. We're going to move on to gameplay now. And the first thing I want to start off with all this is what makes this gameplay interesting to me is that it is, RPG gameplay. It's turn-based, it's menu-based. I believe, I forget, I know in the remake you can choose between wait and active time battle. Was it the same in the original?
I think you were just taking turns. I don't think it was an active time battle. Yeah. So it's just probably based on a speed or a hidden speed stat or something like that. You were just taking turns one after the other.
And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is no ATB in the remake, but
if there was, I played it classic mode, so I don't know if there was in the remake. I just played it the way I remembered. So
I gotcha.
Maybe, I don't know.
The first thing I want to shout out about this, though, regardless of how the battle, it's an active time battle or wait, doesn't really matter. I mean, it does to a degree, but the more important thing is how they took menu-based combat that you see in Final Fantasy, that you see in, Phantasy Star and Breath of Fire, and think of any other RPG series, Chrono Trigger, that you couldn't think of. And they're like, well, how do we make even the gameplay more Mario-esque? And there's two ways they did it. Once, we're starting with the combat, but even in world traversal, that they do some really interesting things, and we'll get into that. But in terms of combat specifically, they do a lot of timed attacks. Every character has the ability to do a timed attack where, after you do your attack, it'll hit, assuming that it does hit. Obviously, there's always a chance to miss. But if you hit the confirm button again right before the attack lands, it does extra damage. And in the original, it would just do an extra boost of damage. In the remake, they really up it for you. It does extra damage and it does splash damage to all the other enemies on screen. So if you do 100 damage to the main enemy, you might do 40 to all the surrounding enemies or something along those lines. I just think that's a really simple way to make a game feel more Mario-esque. I don't know. I just thought that was it's such a simple idea, but since Mario is a platformer, how can you incorporate platformer elements into your combat? I thought that was at least a good starting point. What do you all think, though?
Yeah, I mean, timed hits are shamelessly timed hits are my favorite kind of combat in turn-based RPGs. Sea of Stars has become one of my favorite RPGs of the last few years. I love Super Mario RPG. I love the Mario and Luigi games. And there's something crunchy about it. And what I mean by crunchy is tactile in those kinds of things, especially with rumble feedback and stuff now on modern games. But my favorite kind of action games, I think of Hi-Fi Rush and Devil May Cry, are crunchy, right? The combat has this weight, and that's what Mario RPG has with the timed hits. And what's really fun is the spells even have timed hits, and those are harder to nail down. But when you do, you get an extra sound effect or a flourish, and it feels really satisfying. And there's something to that satisfaction. Not to keep bringing up modern games, but in Mario and Luigi Brothership, they take it to the next level where the timed attacks, Mario and Luigi, for each of their attacks, both brothers still attack and they work off each other. So like if you attack with Mario, the first attack you hit A, then the second part of the attack you hit B, and then it flourishes with a final one for A again. So it's ABA for the jump attacks, and then for the hammer attacks, it's just AB or BA. And like the graphics are gorgeous. The brothers really get to work together. And like, so it's not just the special moves that require both brothers, it's every single attack. And you don't do no damage if you screw it up, unless you hit the initial button and like miss the initial button. But like, it just like, there aren't a lot of RPGs where I go hunting for battles. Eventually I get tired of fighting and want to just get to whatever I'm doing. But that hasn't happened in the new Mario and Luigi game because of how crunchy and tactile that combat is. And that started here. Super Mario RPG just kind of has this fun, like we're going to talk about it in a bit when we talk about weapons, but like one of my favorite weapons in the game is because how tactile it feels to use this ridiculous weapon. And I think timed hits will always do that better than any other kind of hit prompt, because it's in rhythm, it's with the game, it's with the momentum of the fighting. It really just kind of and you can't just sit there and like pick everyone's attacks and just wait. I don't mind that in your Final Fantasies and the like, where you just in those old turn-based games where you just hit the attack and you don't have to time anything. But there's something about that like feedback and the combat is not just static that makes it really engaging, especially in this game.
Yeah, I would have to agree. It's definitely my favorite part of this game because Matt, it's an interesting way you said crunchy, but I agree with that descriptor. I think that's a really good description of it. And like you said, it's not just so they didn't have to go this extra length to do this, because by adding in these timed, they could have just had like a simple attack. You pick attack, Mario runs up and punches the guy. That's the end of it, right? You have less animations to do. But by adding in this timed attack, they have extra animations on if you get the time attack correct. So like if Mario has a hammer, instead of doing one bonk, he'll do two bonks. And again, we'll get to that when we talk to about weapons and stuff. But by doing this, they were making more work for themselves, but they felt like it was worthwhile to reward the player for having that skill and mastering the combat. And that extends to the special attacks too. So not only do you have your just standard attacks with your weapons, but you have a pool of flower points that you can spend on special actions. So like for Mario, that's like a jump, or you can shoot fireballs, or with Malo, you can like summon thunder or summon a rain cloud to heal people. And you can spend those points basically like MP to do these special moves. And all of these too, they don't all just have the like required timing to hit it. Some of them are like, oh, rotate the D-pad. Some of them are like, oh, hold the button and then let go when the 3 stars in the corner charge up, or like mash a button, or like rotate the D-pad, or anything like that. So they built in different kinds of like interaction to the combat that they didn't have to go the extra mile to do that, because they had to make like extra animations and program probably extra things into the game to make that work. But it's really rewarding for players that like master that skill. Like, for example, Mario has a special attack called Super Jump. And if you master the timing for Super Jump, he'll just keep jumping on enemies over and over and over and over. You can get, I've seen YouTube videos that people go for like 15 minutes with the Super Jump and deal like the max amount of damage. Yeah, you can like max out the damage to like 999 and beat a boss like in one Super Jump. Like the timing gets really tight, but some people have absolutely mastered it. Same with like Geno. Geno has a move called Geno Whirl, where the timing window is really tight, but if you hit it, it'll deal the max damage to a lesser enemy encounter. I don't know if it works on all bosses, but you can basically get a 9999 on an enemy encounter, like classic Final Fantasy, and wipe out that enemy. So yeah, I think it's a really good call to make the battle system a little more engaging, especially like this year I've gone back and played some of these older RPGs where it's just very much like, yeah, the tactical part of it is you're selecting the attacks and just the attacks are going off. I think it's really cool to add in that Mario element of it, of the timing and the platform, to the combat system.
I think something that I didn't even think about until I read, I think it was in the interview I read from Schmuppalations, where they wanted to make the combat more, not necessarily fast paced in the sense that you were, the fights ended quickly, but they wanted to make it so you're always doing something similar to what a platformer would be. Platformers, you don't get a lot of downtime. You're moving, you're jumping, you're dodging. And while you can't replicate that necessarily in an RPG standpoint, you can kind of try to replicate that feeling and that vibe. And I feel like the timed hits, it always gives you something to do. No matter what, there's always something to do in combat other than just confirming an action, right? And like you, Matt, I do enjoy, old school, like classic RPGs, your Final Fantasies, Chrono Trigger is both one of our favorite games. We both adore that game. But in Mario RPG, by giving the player always something to do, it does make you that much more invested in the combat. Also, I think this combat really sets forward, especially with the two other games, the Paper Mario and Superstar Saga that I've played up until the point that we're recording this game really sets the template for how those two games iterate on this idea of having this very tactile, crunchy, as you put it, Matt, combat style where you're always doing something timing based, similar to an RPG. They don't punish you for not being able to do it necessarily. You're always able to at least get a hit off, but it rewards skilled players while not punishing unskilled players, if that makes sense. And I think that's a really friendly mechanic to encourage players who maybe only play RPGs to get into this, because now their timing skill actually has some value to it, as opposed to just like if you're not into strategy, then maybe this isn't for you, but you can brute force your way through a lot of different enemies in this game. Something I give the game developers props for, though, is they don't let you do that entirely. I think a lot of the boss fights are super inventive for this. Like, you can see them getting more inventive as the RPG games go along, but at least in this first one here, like they have so many unique and like fun ideas. Like, just looking at a list of some of the other bosses, like King Calamari, where you have to take out individual tentacles at first, or like I fucking hate these bosses, but the Axum Rangers.
Oh, I love them.
Hell
They're
yeah,
my
dude.
favorite.
It's so good.
They're so
I
great.
like for how Power Ranger-y they are. I have when I first saw them, I'm like, this is amazing. This is great. They are fucking horrible in the original game.
Yeah.
That fight's rough. Yeah, I
Horrible.
agree.
That fight is so hard in the original game. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I was like dreading it the whole way through up until when I was playing the remake, and then I did in the remake. I'm like, oh, that's it. They must have downplayed it in the remake because it was way harder in the original. But like each of the bosses just do not, I shouldn't say each, but a lot of them do some unique or different ideas with how you defeat them. I can't remember. I mean, there's like a ton of bosses, so I'm having a hard time. Boyer,
Boyer's a great one. Yeah,
Boyer.
I never know how to say it, but
Bowyer.
Bowyer.
I've heard it every way.
He's a bow. It's a bow. They're a bow, and they shoot arrows at you. But there's also buttons in front of the screen that you can't hit. Like it's on the battlefield, and if Bower shoots one of those buttons, then it locks that command option for you. So if they shoot the special button, then all the moves that use your flower points suddenly you're not able to use. If they shoot the item button, then you can't use items anymore. If they shoot the attack button, then I'm really pissed, but that does happen when you can't just regularly attack. And I like that they try to find different ways to incorporate the types of attacks you can do. So like some enemies are up in the air and some people can't always hit them normally. So you would need your people like Mario who can jump, or Geno who has a ranged weapon, stuff like that. I think that might be something more in the later games. Are there any enemies in this game that you can only hit, like if you can only do air attacks? I forget if there's some characters who can't hit air.
I don't think so.
I don't think so. In the
Okay,
later
that's
games,
a Paper Mario thing.
Yeah, in the later games, in the Mario Luigi games too, you can't hit flying enemies often with a hammer. You have to jump on them, just like you can't jump on. In this game, you can't jump on spiked enemies. You have to use a hammer for them.
Yeah. Okay, so
that's a nice touch. Yeah,
it's stuff like that where they literally they do encourage a little bit of strategy, but it's never to the point where it all feels very natural. It doesn't feel like you have to necessarily guess, test, and revise every single time. Because some of the things that always frustrate me in some RPG games is like you'll confront a boss and you'll be doing your normal strategies and they're not working. So then you have to start testing, like, okay, what are they weak to? This one. Are they weak to this element? Are they weak to this status effect? Are they weak to this? And then you're just running through a Rolodex of different possible statuses and elements to see what will work. Versus this, it's like, can you jump on them or can you smash them with a hammer? That's about it. And there's a couple things here and there. And it's funny, I think you kind of touched on it a little bit before, Matt. One of the things in terms of the combat and weapons, one of Miyamoto's notes to Square when they were developing this was that he didn't want the games to be weapons focused like other Square RPGs. And my thought was kind of like, well, maybe that's where timed hits came about. Like you jump on enemies, you hammer enemies, because Mario did have a hammer even in the in Donkey Kong, and that was actually something that Miyamoto really pushed. He wanted Mario to have a hammer in this. But Matt, you had a thought on this as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, also, like, yes, that's probably true, but also Gino ends up having variety of guns, shooting from his fingers, his elbow, whatever. Mallow uses either a stick or cymbals, which is really fun.
Yeah.
But like my favorite is all of the weapons that Bowser gets. Bowser's one of my favorite characters in the game, and like he gets chain chomps, which are awesome. Just to use a chain chomp as a weapon, like a mace or a ball and chain, is just really awesome. But the best weapon he gets, hands down, is called the Hurley gloves. And what the Hurley gloves do is they literally let you throw Mario like a weapon. And if Mario has a status ailment, then you throw like the little action figure Mario that the kid in Rosetown had. But if he's unaffected, if he's just himself, he's replaced by that little action figure in the lineup while you chuck him. And it is the best because the slapstick we were talking about, like the sprites, like in this game are some of the most expressive sprites I think ever made. And Mario especially is really expressive, a shock and like a look of like freaking out. And whenever Bowser throws him, he like hits the enemy like he's face down on the floor, and then he pops back, and when you do the timed hit, he's holding Mario's like flailing as he throws him again. And it's just it's so funny. And so for him to say, yeah, we don't want to be as weapon focused, it's like, right, yeah, but hurling Mario as a weapon is less violent. Sure. but I really love that weapon, and there's so many of those kinds of weapons in this game that pay homage to like Princess Peach gets a fan, gets a umbrella, gets all sorts of different weapons. Also,
the
slap gloves, frying pan.
Yep.
She like literally just slaps people. There's one slap glove that she gets where her hand gets bigger on the second slap. Like,
yeah, Peach throws hands.
Oh, this is one of my favorite depictions of Peach. It's not perfect, but it's one of the better ones. And I feel like in the RPG, she gets some cool stuff to do. It's a mixed bag. But like this was a lot of fun to have her in your lineup and her be your healer and be able to fight. And like, yeah, the weapons in these games, I think part of it is like what you're saying, Josh. The combat feels less like Final Fantasy because of the slapstick. It often just feels goofy and over the top. That was basically what I wanted to use the Hurley glove example as, was that like, because this stuff is so comedic and over the top, there's no blood. Like it doesn't feel violent in that same way. It feels violent the same way Looney Tunes cartoons are.
Absolutely. And something you brought up too with like just thinking of combat made me think of this, I should say. When you level up in this game, one of the cool things that you can do is you can choose a different stat to level up, or you can choose whether you want to upgrade your HP, your flower points, or your power, I believe, right? You're just your flat out power.
Your attack, your
attack and defense.
Damage, yeah.
I think this is one of the I shouldn't say the few. I really enjoyed the remake a lot, but something I loved in the remake is the level up screen. Compared to the original's fine. It's your character who levels up, you see them pop up, they cheer, and you pick which one you want to upgrade and whatnot, and they come back. And just kind of like aiding to this. It's not quite slapstick, but it kind of goes with the overall goofy vibe, is why I thought about it now. It's kind of like a weird half-assed like transition here, but when you level up in the remake, every you're on a stage, the person who gets leveled up gets the spotlight put on them. All the other characters that are in that are on your team, whether they're in your party at that time or not, are all there, and they're all just dancing, all to the rhythm that did it. And I love that so much. I love how, like, just this silly kind of like dancing thing. It's really cute and it's really fun. And I remember when I was playing this game for the show, I could play it in front of my daughter because it's a really silly, lighthearted game. And I wouldn't always have my headphones in because, I don't always want to. I usually have my headphones in when I'm playing when my kid's still awake because they're either watching TV or my wife's trying to read a book or whatnot. But she would sit down next to me. She's 3. And she'd want to watch me play. So she's like, can I hear the music? I'm like, here, hold on then. So I would take the headphones out. And every time the music for leveling up would play, or actually it's at the end of the battle, but that music continues on, we would just start dancing in the couch.
I love that.
Like, she was getting like really into it. Like, she loved it. She would be specifically ask me like, hey, when's that coming on? When's that dance music coming on again? And stuff like that. It was absolutely fantastic. This game, we were talking about how this game means a lot to people back when they're growing up, but I think the reason it resonated so much with me now was I got to have that experience with my daughter of just like playing this really silly, slapsticky, cute game, and her just watching me play it. Like, she was asking like, where's Luigi? She didn't know where Luigi was for the most of the game and whatnot. It was just awesome. I know that's a little bit of a side tangent, so we can bring it back to the combat. But before, is there anything else either of you want to talk about with the combat? Like any of the power-ups, any of the specific character abilities that we didn't get to touch on? There is one other thing the remake adds that we should touch on, but before that, anything else from you guys?
I did want to mention, since you mentioned the leveling up system, and I don't remember because I've only played the remake once, so I don't know if they fixed this, but in the original game, when you are leveling up, you can make those choices, but there is a critical path of selections that will net you the strongest characters. So at every level, there is a decision that you can make that will net you the most stats, that if you make them all correctly, by the time you max out at level 30, your character will be as strong as they possibly can be. So it's kind of like a built-in like difficulty. Like, you can't obviously select like easy or hard mode in this, but like if you make the optimal choices when you're leveling up, it will make the game easier for you. So I don't know if that was like intentional, something that they like thought of, or it was just like they wanted the leveling system to be a bit more predictable. So by making choices along the critical path, or by choosing to ignore those choices and just build your characters kind of however you want, you can kind of move the difficulty of the game around a little bit by the choices that you make. And I don't know if a lot of people know that about the leveling system.
Yeah, I mean, I think partially the remake is just easier across the board.
Yes.
Between the AoE and how the timed hits are clearer and you can see them more easily. The time hits are easier to hit. The windows are a little bigger, I think, especially on the special moves. But yeah, I think so whenever you get your bonus round, there's always one of the 3 will always get a bigger bonus. Like 2 of them will only give you like a 1 or 2 bump, but there'll always be one that's like 3 to 5.
Right.
If you follow that, if you always pick those, you will always have the best character that character can be. And I think that was, from what I remember of the remake, which I admittedly haven't played for like a year, I believe that was still in there, but the game across the board was made easier. So I don't know that it's as noticeable because a lot of the quality of life improvements kind of also negated some of that stuff. The game still has challenges, but it's definitely way easier than it was on the Super Nintendo.
Agreed.
Yeah, absolutely. I would actually say one of my biggest issues with the remake is that it's a little bit too easy. Like, I didn't have enough of a challenge at all. And I understand there is a time and place for like, kid, like person's first RPG, kid or adult or otherwise, like their first RPG. I remember back when I did Chrono Trigger with Dave years ago, we kind of talked about how Chrono Trigger is a really great introductory RPG. I'd actually give that title over to Super Mario RPG Remake now, because it's very fun. Like, everything we've talked about, all the vibes of it, the writing, all that stuff, but it's very easy. There's no challenge to it. And normally that would make me dislike a game a little bit, but it doesn't. Like, I think it's not a good thing that they did it, but it also doesn't severely impact my opinion on that.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I can say to that is conservatively, Josh, I've played this game 20 times. So for the 21st time, don't really care that there's a challenge or not. Like, I just want to
Exactly.
experience it. I can see, like, I have friends who have only played it a couple times or played it for the first time, and they were a little disappointed by the lack of challenge. And I totally get that. But for me, didn't matter. I just wanted to play through the game. If I were to struggle, it probably would have frustrated me. I know I was coming here for nostalgia. Like, there was no want
Same.
for challenge here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, but I do agree. I think this is easy. Like, from now on, if I know someone who likes Mario and has never played an RPG, this absolutely would be my first recommendation. It would have been Chrono Trigger, yeah, or it might have been Mario and Luigi on the Game Boy Advance, because that I feel like also has its challenges, but like at least the beginning of the game is pretty straightforward, and like there are less things to worry about as you go on, or as you start, and then it picks up as you go. But yeah, hands down, the remake of Super Mario RPG, sans the 7 stars for whatever reason. That part of the title's gone.
Yeah, that's weird.
It is weird. Well, also the remake isn't made by, like, Square is not involved. They gave permission, but they're not involved. So that could be part of it. But yeah, I agree. It's definitely, like, I think the pinnacle for like entry level RPG, without a doubt.
One of the things that they did do in the remake is they did add a post game after you beat the game that has some challenging stuff in it. Like, there's a boss gauntlet component of that where you can go back and refight tougher versions of all the bosses, and that culminates with a second fight against Culex. So there's 2 versions of Culex you can fight in the remake. You can fight the pixelated version from the original game, and then once you beat that one and do the boss gauntlet, at the end of that you fight 3D Culex.
Ooh,
and so
cool.
those bosses at the end of the game actually do provide you a bit more of a challenge if you want it. But that's something if you only want to go and look for that after you've already beaten the game. That doesn't really play into the general difficulty of the main game at all. Just a little tidbit there.
That's good to note. And when some of the ways they did make this combat and made the gameplay easier, there's a handful of things they did. One we already touched on. It was that when you do the timed attack like perfectly, it doesn't just deal bonus damage to the enemy you hit, it does splash damage to all surrounding enemies. But it also has a thing where there's a like a bar that goes up. I forget exactly what they call it, but it basically, every time you do a timed hit, if you do a perfect one, the bar goes up even more. But if you get a timed deflect, or you can deflect an enemy's attack to either lessen the damage or completely negate it, which I think negation is new to the remake. You can completely negate damage if you time it perfectly. And then if you time your attack perfectly, same thing, but there's a bar that goes up and you get a percentage every time you do that. That percentage rises if you do it continuously. And every time you do it continuously, your characters also get added bonuses and benefits and stat boosts. Once you get that meter all the way up, then you are given access to a triple attack, and the triple attack is completely new to the remake. It does a handful of things. It's dependent on which 3 characters you have in your party at the time. Each combination of characters is a little different. I generally didn't swap out characters a lot to see all of them. I probably should have in preparation for this. I only really saw 2. I think there's one that lets you heal. I think you need Mallow, Peach, and Mario for that. I don't quite remember though. And I always went with, my original party was Mallow, Mario, and then Gino. And then once I got Bowser, I swapped out Gino for Bowser. And then once I got Peach, I swapped out Mallow for Peach, because Peach is like, Bowser just does so much freaking damage, and Peach heals so well compared to Mallow. So that's where I went with. But I only ever really saw their triple attacks with those combinations. I didn't really tinker around too much with the rest. But there's a lot of really cool things that you can do. It encourages you to experiment with different party combinations, because you can get different triple attacks. And also, like I mentioned, every time you do a continuous block or a continuous timed attack, it gives you different stat boosts. So like it really rewards you for this timed hit things. Like, they really want you to I've like, the amount of incentives this game gives you to practice your timed hits is insane.
Yeah, and I mean, like the triple attack thing is partnered with a party swapping mechanic. You can swap party members mid battle. You can swap party members when a party member goes down. None of that was in the original game. That also makes this game a lot easier because to really lose, your whole party has to go down, not just one party member. And the triple attacks are very Chrono Trigger-esque, actually, in that vein, that depending on the party makeup will affect the kind of triple attack. I swap people a lot in the remake because you could. In the original game, I also was Mario, Bowser, Peach because of what you said, Josh. But I felt like in this game, it was easier to swap in and out because if I was clearing out easier enemies in an area, I wasn't fighting a boss for a while, I could just have Mallow in to do small spot healing instead of Peach. And I'm just a Geno fan, like a lot of people, so I liked having him in when I could. But yeah, it's really interesting that there were small incentives in the original game to use timed hits besides the damage, but in this game they really built a whole system around it, which I think is really a great improvement. I think the original version is still good, but I think again this leads to like someone's first RPG. Like all of the mechanics are so intertwined that it really does support each other in a way to kind of get you into a flow.
I think that's almost why it didn't bother me that much that it was too easy, because the way they made it too easy, it wasn't like they just dumbed down the bosses. Maybe the Axum Rangers they dumbed down a little bit. Thank God, fuck those guys. But they it's not like they made the game significantly easier in terms of like how hard you get hit or how hard you hit. They didn't do that, but they found ways within the mechanics of the game to encourage players to have an easier time. Like if you're good, like if you think about it, if you can't do timed hits at all, if you're awful at timed hits, all of the benefits I just talked about aren't there for you, just period.
Yeah.
So this game, like it's too easy if you're good at timed hits, which the game incentivizes you to practice because they give you so many different benefits of it. I never really thought about it that way. It's almost like they gave you an easy mode for good players, but that's about it. I don't know. That's an interesting way. I guess that's why it didn't bother me so much.
Well, we spent a lot of time talking about like the difficulty adjustments in the remake. I personally didn't think the original one was that difficult, especially compared to.
It wasn't. I think there were certain
some
battles
of the contemporaries at the time.
For sure. Oh, absolutely. Compared to its contemporaries, it was a cakewalk. But like the Axum Rangers fight is tough. The Smithy battle is tough. Like they're not impossible, but also like there were certain armor augments which are in this game too, like the Lazy Shell, which makes everything a cakewalk at a cost. But like I think that I don't think that I agree with you, Eric. I don't think the original game was unbearably difficult,
right? But and I wasn't trying to make that point and being like, oh, like I'm so good at video games, because I'm not. I'm terrible at video games. But I think when we talk about like how easy they made the remake, I truly think that the Super Mario RPG remake that came out kind of fills the same role that I feel like the original Super Mario RPG filled when it came out. Because if I imagine the way this game was made was they were sitting in a boardroom, and this was, you have to remember, this was 1996. So this was before 1997. RPGs were still kind of a niche until Final Fantasy VII came out. So there was a real chance that an unsuspecting parent or a kid would walk by this game on the shelf and see, oh, it's Super Mario, but what are those letters in front of it? I don't know what an RPG is. And they would pick it up expecting a just standard run-of-the-mill Mario game, and they would get an RPG, and they would have no kind of experience, or they never would have played one before. And so I think what the remake does well is exactly what the original game does well, and that's its major strength, is that it teaches you the rules of an RPG through the frame of Mario in a way that is easy to learn, that is easy to understand, and that rewards you for mastery of its mechanics. Because there would have been a lot of angry people if like Square made a balls to the wall hard Mario RPG. Like this is the hardest Mario game we've ever made. So I think in that way, Square did a really good job of making something that I guarantee you it had to have happened to somebody, like an unsuspecting parent or grandparent picked this game up thinking it was just Mario, and their kids got it and they're like, well, what is this? What are these menus? Why are they just standing there in a row? So I think they had to build this game with that kind of thought in mind and make it approachable to people. And I think it largely succeeds. The original and the remake both kind of do that, even though you'd expect more people to have experience with RPGs now that they're kind of in the mainstream. But the people that originally played this game now are grown up. We're parents. We have our own kids, and this would be the perfect game to show them and be like, hey, I played this back when I was a kid. This would be the perfect game for them to share that genre of RPGs with.
That's a really good point. And I think something you said there, I think is a good segue into the second half of gameplay. We've been focused on combat for quite a while, and we've been going for a little bit. So I want to segue to the next portion, of the gameplay. And the point you made, Eric, about how people who play this, who may back especially in '96, like they may never, like, you know, a grandparent buying this would be like, what, RPG, whatever, who cares? It's a Mario game. My grandkids love Mario. I think one of the other ways they kind of eased non-RPG players into this is they added a lot of platforming elements to the traversal, which we've talked about a little bit. Some of the ideas I think are annoying as shit. Some of them I think are awful. Some of them I think are genius, and I want more RPGs to do it. I'm going to start off real quick with the awful. I don't think the platforming segments are great, where they have these isometric, like especially in Bowser's Keep or castle at the end of the game, where there's like, you know, these lava pits and you have to like jump across these things, because platforming in isometric games it's hard. Like the camera angle just makes it inherently a little bit difficult to judge distance and judge like where you're at spatially. They do a pretty good job with this. I don't think it's completely unfair, but it's still not the most fun in my opinion. I like how they do it earlier in the game, where it's not meant to be a test. It's meant to supplement the exploration, and it's not meant to necessarily test your platforming skills, but it's using platforming mechanics to allow you to explore more of the world. I think that's great. I think that's a really cool idea. It, especially in like the very first like forest, like when you're leaving Mario's house to go to you know, Princess Peach's castle and everything. I think that's great. Or Toadstool in this, or when you're going to your castle, like you get a little taste of it by being able to like ride platforms up and maybe jump and hit blocks to get extra coins. And the thing I think that it works best with is where if you hit one of the coin blocks and you get the superstar, and it makes you invulnerable, and then you can run through enemies like you would in a Mario platformer game, and you get experience for it. You can level up like multiple times. It is one of the most satisfying portions of the game, and they do it sparingly. They don't overdo it and they don't underdo it. Like you can do it like a handful of times throughout the game if you can find the stars. And so every time you get it, since it's so few and far between, it's so rewarding. It's especially when you see like there's a room full of enemies, like small enemies. I'm like, oh, there's got to be a superstar hidden here somewhere. So if you kind of start kind of gamesmanshiping, whatever the hell I'm trying to say, like you're trying to use a little strategery and figure it out. Like I love that. I think the way they married the platforming elements to the exploration overall is really, really good. And I think it's a really cool way to do it. I just have an issue with when they use it as a test at the end of the game, because it's the main point of an RPG isn't to test your platforming mechanics. It's to test your like strategy and combat mechanics for the most part. And your exploration of just like, and it might test your exploration, which the quizzes kind of do. I'm not a fan of the quizzes personally, but like those are quizzes of how much did you explore our world and how much did you retain. So I have less of an issue with the quizzes, even though I fucking hate them in almost any game that does it. I consider that more of a personal gripe. It's not my favorite. Like, why would I pay attention to this one random small thing? But they do okay in this. I'm going to throw it over to you first, Eric. What are your thoughts on kind of all of this, you know, platforming in the exploration sense?
I think in terms of just pure platforming, I think the most difficult portions of the game that involve that are definitely ones that involve like jumping to floating things. Like if you jump onto like the floating platforms that kind of rotate around you, sometimes just with the isometric view, it's kind of hard to judge like where that next platform you have to jump to is in like the 2.5 like D space on the Z axis. And there are a couple portions in the game where like you have to jump to things that are floating. And that aspect of it is when it's like the most difficult. Like there's one portion near like the last third of the game where you're trying to like get up to like the Cloud Kingdom, and you have to like climb on all these Koopa Troopas, and jumping to them like up the side of this cliff. And when they're floating on the air can be like kind of difficult. So that portion of it with like the Z-axis and the isometric, when things are floating in midair and you have to like jump to them, and like one jump can cause you to like fall a long way, those are the difficult portions of it. But again, I think it's really brilliant that they married the platforming aspects of Mario with the exploration aspects of an RPG, because again, going back to like the point I made with the combat, you're operating under the assumption that this is somebody's first RPG when they pick it up and play it, and they don't want to scare somebody away from the fact that it is a Mario game by having all these heavy-handed like traditional RPG elements of it. So like, what do you do to make it more familiar to a person who may only be familiar with Mario but not an RPG? He jumps, he explores levels, he jumps around, he that's just what he does. And I think that's a really brilliant way to marry that with the exploration aspect of an RPG and make it feel familiar. And that was kind of the whole point of the episode that I wrote on my show, is that they make the game feel familiar so that you're willing to stick with it if it is your first RPG while you learn the RPG elements. They constantly at every single turn remind you, hey, this might be an RPG, but it's Mario. Look, he jumps around on platforms. He finds treasure chests. He finds the power star. He jumps on enemies. He still does those things. It's just in a little bit of a different format and presentation than you're used to. And I think every decision that they make in this game, including the jumping around, including the platforming to explore, reinforces that familiarity. So it's not somebody just like giving up on it because it doesn't feel like a Mario game. They did a fantastic job of towing the line between RPG and Mario game. And yes, while some of the platforming might be a little bit tricky and not the greatest in isometric, I think that line is beautifully reinforced every single chance they get with every decision they make in this game. And the platforming via exploration is the prime example of that.
Matt, what are your thoughts on this? I'm with you on that, Eric. I like all your points there. Matt, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I agree with you, Josh. I think the platforming is the worst part of this game in both versions. Like, it's not bad. Like, I've played bad platformers. Y'all go play Balan Wonderworld if you want to play it. But like, you're
Mario
right.
the Lost Levels.
Mario the Lost Levels. I don't want to say it's bad, but it's definitely very hard. But like, yeah, I think that trying to jump isometric, it's tough. They made it a little better in the remake, but not much. I think that gets better in the Paper Mario and Mario and Luigi series. Still not perfect, but they give you like power-ups and abilities that kind of help supplement it a bit, or make you give like more defined shadows so you can really see where you're landing, things like that. But I don't like, there are people who've complained about it being like, oh, I can't do it, it's too hard, or I hate it. And it's like, no, it's as someone who is also not very good at video games, it's fine. It's just a little annoying. Like stuff like the climb out of Monstro Town to try and get to Nimbus Land is frustrating because every time you fall, it resets. You have to do it again.
Yeah.
Like until you've done it once, and then they're just there. But like, you know, there are things that are frustrating about it. But I also agree, Eric, with your perspective that like this is what connects it to its roots as a Mario game. And like, if they didn't have it at all, it wouldn't make much sense. And I think that when the reason Mario and Luigi games especially get better is there are a lot more 2D planes you're jumping on, or even as it's kind of isometric on the world map or top down, like it's more delineated so you can really tell where stuff is. It's still not always perfect, but it's like easier. And so like, I don't love the platforming, but I'm never sad by it. The Starman thing, like the coolest thing ever when that first area with the wolves where you fight them and then you can find them like stand on the platforms as they rotate to get to the Starman and then fight a bunch of them, and they keep coming forever endlessly until your Starman runs out. Like I love that.
Yeah.
I got like 2 level ups. If you're fast enough and like crafty enough and know their positioning and where they're coming in from, you can get like a level or 2 for each character, and it's really
those
satisfying.
Are wolves?
Yeah, I think they're wolves.
Oh my god,
they're like blue things.
Oh my god.
But
I thought they were rats, but yeah, wolves make sense. That makes way more sense.
But doing that, and then like after Starman runs out, it just jumps to the level up screen and you go through all the level ups. Like I love that. It feels like you're breaking the system a little bit, and I love that they incorporated something like that, because I think you get to do that at least twice from what I can remember, and it's satisfying every time.
Now, Eric, those wolves are credited as canines on the Mario wiki, so
Fair.
they are dogs. They are.
I should have
some
just
sort of-
learned to read. Probably that would have helped.
That would help. That would help you. But why start now? You've gotten so far already, Eric. Why
I probably could have gotten further if I did.
Now, Matt, you referenced a handful of different areas in this game. I think the next section that I want to talk about in the episode is we're going to kind of start getting into visuals and aesthetics, and of course, then closing out on sound at the very end. I want to talk about like zones and visuals and aesthetics and that kind of stuff. And I want to throw it back over to you, Matt, because I feel like I've been going first and being able to say my fill without letting my wonderful guests get to share their stuff first. So I want to throw it over to you, Matt. What's your favorite kind of zone and area in the game? And just feel free to talk about the visuals of the game in general.
Oh man, favorite zone. That's so hard. It's like picking my favorite kid. I mean, I really like the forest maze, but that's also because of the music. And so
that's
get
my
to
favorite
that
track in the whole song or game, excuse me.
Because you have good taste in music.
Earworm. Yeah.
But like with music aside, I love the forest maze, how it's constructed, the enemies, the setup. The fun fact before the Bowyer fight, when he's shooting arrows just in the forest, it's and in the town, it's programmed to avoid you. You have to work really hard to get hit with an arrow, but if you do, Mario gets stunned for a little bit and then starts to walk again, unlike the Toads who get frozen forever. Which I always thought was very funny. And so I always think of that. But like, I think Rosetown and the Forest Maze is one of my favorite areas. I also really love Moleville. It's so quaint. The townsfolk are like the classic, like friendly townfolk. I love the narrative of finding the kids in the mine, and you fight Croc. I can't remember his name. I think it's Croco. God, that kills me that his name has escaped me. But the thief, the crocodile thief, who you've already encountered before. I love that you get to encounter him by jumping on a spring that's clearly under a ceiling. But because you can't see the ceiling in these games because of the isometric view, you assume the spring goes somewhere, and then you slam your head into the ceiling and pass out from a concussion, and then he steals all your stuff and you got to chase him. It's just crafty things like that. But I really love that, and the mine as well. The music is really great there too. And then generally, I think so. This is the thing that kills me about the remake. I don't think that the redesigns are bad. I think that they actually did a really good job with the redesigns, smoothing them out, making the characters mostly just look chibi. But like what I loved about, again, crunchiness, we're going to go back to like words like that. I loved how chunky the sprites were, because they did the 3D renders like they had done, in games like Donkey Kong Country, and then made sprites out of the 3D renders. But they have a claymation feel. So I still own my original copy of the Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars strategy guide. It's falling apart, but I still have it. And in that, you have blown up versions of those sprites with no pixelation, and they literally look like they're made out of clay. And I love that design. It's why I love the new Zelda game and the Link's Awakening remake, because it also had that kind of claymation style. I love claymation. I grew up watching a lot of claymation, and the original game had that aesthetic. When they remade it and HDified it, we lost a lot of that. We lost a lot of that character. And so while I don't think it looks bad in the new game, because I'm so used to the original, I just feel like it's a little less than, because there's some that, to me at least, and I know, Josh, you've talked about this a lot on your show, there's character in old games and the sprite work that you kind of lose when you smooth out pixels or when you like HDify stuff.
You make them too crisp.
Right. And I like HD remasters, and I like the PlayStation era is perfect for HD remasters. Like I've seen screenshots of the new Soul Reaver remasters, and they look great, right? They smooth out the harsh edges. You can see more. It looks really great. But I feel like something about sprite work that really like lives in its environment, and when you change it, it kind of, you lose some of the character. So I do like the remake, but ultimately the original design has my heart. But I love the way these worlds are designed. The areas are just big enough to feel explorable, but small enough that you don't feel like you're going to get lost. No stage feels endless or too big. I think it's got one of the strongest designs. Like I can clearly picture, even not having played the game for a year and not having played the classic for like 4 or 5 years, I can still clearly picture each zone. Booster's Tower we talked about earlier has some of
Booster's
the
Bay.
I mean, just has some of the coolest architecture.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, I really love the design of this game, and I think it's one of the best designed Super Nintendo games I think ever made.
Eric, throwing it over to you. What is some of your favorite zones and just kind of like the overall visuals of the game?
Yeah, I want to start with the visuals because I was thinking about what Matt just said, and yeah, one of the main criticisms levied against this game when I talked about it over like the past year or so was that, especially when you play the original version, was like it doesn't look that good, and like Mario kind of looks like a gremlin, and well, yeah, you have to play the game in the time it was designed. When you slap a CRT filter on this game, and that's like what they were designing on. They were designing on TVs and monitors with scan lines. So that's how they made the pixels to account for the space in the scan lines. This game looks goddamn incredible. Like, yeah, it's anything you play that has like that pixel-based sprite work. If you're playing it on like a flat LCD screen or like you're emulating it or something, it's going to not look the same it did when it was designed in the time that it was. As far as like the remake, yeah, some of the like Mario kind of like is a little more squat in the remake. He kind of has like short little arms, and it's kind of like everybody kind of has just like smaller proportions. It's kind of like funny, but also a little bit creepy at the same time. But yeah, I think for both games specifically, yeah, same thing as Matt. I love the style of the remake because it is kind of that Link's Awakening remake, Echoes of Wisdom kind of that kind of visual style. And I think that lends itself really well to a game like this. But even if I'm playing the game on a not CRT TV with the scan lines, I still love the look of the original. It's so like quintessential Super Nintendo. It's just what I think of when I think of the Super Nintendo at that time. It's like iconic graphics. As far as like favorite zones and stuff, I would agree with Matt. I think Moleville is awesome. Just the atmosphere of like a miner's town and their moles, like such a great Mario idea of like, yeah, of course all these moles would be in like a miner
when
town.
You have Monty
like that,
Mole too as like one of the enemies in the game. So
yes, it makes perfect sense. Matt, I did double check. It is Krakow. So, because I was like, I'm afraid that I was going to call it the wrong thing too. So, Krakow, you had it. And so I think Moletown is one of my favorites. I really like the ghost ship that you go to.
Oh yeah, Johnny. Johnny is probably one of the coolest.
Specifically that reason,
just because of his
Jones.
name.
Yeah, Johnny is like one of the coolest like character. I wish Johnny made other appearances in Mario games because Johnny is so freaking cool. And then like you fight him, and then afterwards he like comes by to help you with another boss. He's just like a bro that way.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I love Johnny. That he makes that whole ghost ship. Like I love the atmosphere of like that sunken ghost ship because it takes the expected norm of like a haunted Mario house that you're used to and kind of flips it on its head. It's like, oh, now it's a sunken ship and all these ghosts are down here. And it has that really cool fight with the big squid too, where you have to defeat the different tentacles too. So there are some great boss fights in that one, even though I think the zone can be a little bit challenging. There's quite a spike in difficulty right there. If you go in and you're under level, then people are just hitting you for a lot of damage. But I think that zone is really great. And then I really liked what they did with Bowser's castle too, how they like once the smithing gang got in, they like converted it to like this industrial zone to like make weapons. I thought that was a really cool like subversion of like a traditional Bowser's castle area. I thought that was really cool. So yeah, those are a couple of my favorites, but same thing as Matt. I can think of like, I think all the zones are like so well done and all the levels are so well done that I can think of them each individually and distinctly. And shout out to Yoster Island as well. I thought that was a cool little Easter egg with all the Yoshis. And yeah, Boshi, the coolest Yoshi you will ever meet with the sunglasses. He's kind of a dick, but he's pretty cool.
Oh, he's very much a dick. I got a couple thoughts on the visuals. I think that this game, the original graphics look significantly better on a CRT. They don't age well outside of a CRT, but I don't think that's a knock against the game. I think when you're talking about graphics, you need to talk about them in the way they were meant to be viewed at the time it came out, right? It's like people do that complain about PS2 graphics that get upscaled and be like, why does this look like shit? I'm like, well, it was meant for a 480p TV. It was meant to not be as like stretched out and have your TV have to adjust on the fly and shit like that. I do think, with that said, I love the original visuals. I like the remakes a little bit more, but that could just be, they're flashy and shiny, so maybe it's just that. I will say, though, the character models for, at least on the box art for the original game, there's a little bit of Uncanny Valley going on there. Mario and Peach specifically have the deadest eyes I've ever seen in my life. The character models. In the interview I was reading all about the game, one of the hardest things for the team to nail was the overall visual style, trying to figure out what made this game look more Mario-esque than like, Square or Final Fantasy. They didn't want it to be just simple sprite swaps of a Final Fantasy game, so that's why they went with the isometric visuals. And they also tried to kind of get away with, they allowed Mario to move in 8 different directions on the isometric viewpoint, which was a little bit different. So it was a way for them to hopefully get rid of some of the issues that people have with isometric, kind of just quell some of the issues and criticisms some people have with isometric games. But there's a funny quote that I found in the interview where the game director Chihiro Fujioka stated that our graphics team cried a lot. That's a direct quote from the interview. That they just cried a lot because Miyamoto kept sending them so many notes on how to get Mario's look right. And I'll be honest, like I said, I'm not a fan. I shouldn't say that. I like the visuals of this game. I think the visuals specifically of like the character models outside of the game world aren't that great, like specifically like on the box art, but I kind of love it a little bit, like for how goofy and off-putting they are. But when you see the visuals in the game on the Super Nintendo on a CRT, it looks good to me, especially for the time it came out. I also think that with all my criticisms levied against the 3D models, I think where those 3D models benefit is in Booster's design. I fucking love Booster. He is a goddamn Muppet in a Mario game. He looks like Animal. He looks like Animal
absolutely.
From the Muppets, right?
Well, it's the mouth flap, right? He doesn't have an open. He has no mouth flap. It's
like a hinge. His head just moves up and down. Yeah,
like Terrence and Phillip, basically.
Yeah.
Oh, I fucking love him so much. And even though he arguably is one of the more problematic characters of the game, because he kidnaps Peach, falls into his tower, and he just wants to marry her. But the weird thing about him is that he's so clueless on what he actually wants to do that he, like, the way that you dispatch of him, because he wants to marry Peach, and so there's a large section of the game where you're rescuing Peach from getting married from Booster. Booster thinks the crazy thing about Booster is that he thinks he won, is because you rescue Peach, she doesn't get to marry Booster. Booster doesn't marry anyone. Someone just reads the marriage rights to him. And he's like, all right, I did that today. See you later. And he leaves. And he's such a goofy, silly, bizarre character. And I love him so much for just the insanity. Like, and it's about midway through the game that he shows up too.
Yeah.
And just, it's one of the most fun sections of the game for me. Like, I love just the fact that, like, you'll be walking through the castle and you'll just see him periodically just coming in and out with his mouth agape with his giant fucking teeth. Just I feel like any moment he's going to do an Arnold Schwarzenegger impression or something like that. I don't know. I love Booster so much, and I think the crazy, goofy, somewhat uncanny valley visuals of the original game work so well for him. I actually prefer, like, I like a lot of the visuals more in the remake. I like Booster's visuals in the original game more because it's so insane. Booster's amazing.
Yeah, that tower is great, and like it has one of my favorite Easter eggs where there's like a curtain that you walk behind.
Yeah,
and often all over Booster's tower there are things that happen when you go behind curtains or through a door or whatever. There's a lot of hidden stuff in that stage. But my favorite thing, one of my two favorite things in that tower, one is if you go behind this curtain and you come out the other side, you go from the regular Mario sprite in this to the original Nintendo Mario sprite. Mm-hmm. And you can just run around as that 2D sprite. And then if you try and go out either of the doors, you like get shrunk, and then it plays the game over theme as you run back behind the curtain, and then you come back out again and shake your head like, oh whoa, what was that? And then the other one is there are a lot of 2-level like puzzles where like you'll get to a top floor and see a doorway and then there's something below. And one of them is to jump on a seesaw to get an item out of a question box that's floating really high up on the second floor. When you do it and you are successful, it says that you got a masher, which is like a type of hammer, and then it falls from the second floor and hits Mario in the head, falls away, and then Mario falls over. Like like we said, it's very Looney Tunes-esque, but Booster's Tower ramps that up to like 1,000, and like there's so many great things that happen in that tower.
I think it's one of the tragedies of this game is until the remake came along, I didn't think we were ever going to get this game like released from like licensing purgatory in any kind of fashion. And that was part of the reason why, I think it would have been cool for Geno to be in Smash, but I don't think they were ever gonna go that route. If they're gonna pick one difficult licensed character to try and get from Square Enix, they were gonna go for the most requested one, which was Sora. But I think that there's so many good characters in this game that fit in Mario's world that it's disappointing that after this, like Nintendo and Square kind of split, and then we kind of lost all those years between them while they were like partnering with PlayStation, because I would have loved to have seen so many of these characters in like additional Mario titles down the road. Like it would have been sweet to see Geno again, or Malo, or have Johnny or Booster. Like have like one of my favorite things about Booster Tower is that like it's implied that like his family has lived there for generations, because you get to see like the paintings of like all the different boosters there. And I just think that's like so cool to think like, oh, there's like a family of boosters in like Mario's world. I think that's super cool, and I wish they would like reutilize some of those ideas in some kind of Mario thing somehow. I don't know how they would do it, but I would love to get to see Johnny again, or see Booster again, or like go on an adventure with Geno and Malo again. I think that'd be really cool.
I mean, hey, they brought back Mario and Luigi with Brothership. Who knows if they'd be willing to do this again. I mean, granted, I'm sure Square has like some licensing rights for Malo and Geno and a lot of the characters created for this game, but I wonder if they'd be able to do, like, if Nintendo handled the development, would they allow them to license the characters, like if the remake sold well enough, I wonder if that was like a testing ground almost for it. So who knows?
So like, if you had asked me that a year ago, I would have said no, but I also thought Link's Awakening, the remake, was going to be a one-off, and then we got Echoes of Wisdom, which was really good for what it was trying to do. I don't think it's a perfect Zelda game by any means, but they reused the aesthetic, the map, some of the maps and other stuff. I don't think we'll get it with Mario RPG, only because Paper Mario was originally going to be Super Mario RPG 2. There was the original title was Super Mario RPG 2. Or something like that. Like it was meant to be the next Super Mario RPG game, and then after a while, they just leaned into just being a new separate franchise. And then, then we got the Mario and Luigi series as well. I just don't think there's anything to go back to. I like the characters, and I agree, but I feel like we're more likely to get Booster in a Mario and Luigi game, I think, than we are to get a Mario and Luigi sequel, because I think Booster and Geno and Malo, if they were to come back, if they were to partner with Square, I don't know that we'd get a Mario RPG 2. We might just
that would make more sense. Yeah.
We'd get just them in something else. I mean, I'm open. I'm, on the other hand, I am completely open to being wrong and eating my words if we get a direct sequel to Super Mario RPG, because I would love that. But like, I just don't foresee it happening.
I think I think it's more likely now, because there seems to be like more willingness to like lend characters to other projects. I mean, just like look at the impossibility that Smash Ultimate is. Like,
of course.
Look at what Fortnite is doing, and like the collection of characters that they've amassed in that game. So, and I think Square and Nintendo's relationship is pretty much repaired at this point. I think
yes, absolutely.
I think that's water under the bridge. I think they're perfectly fine now. So if there was a way to do it, I wish they would find it. I agree. It probably would be something in like a Mario and Luigi game or something like that. I know Paper Mario is supposed to be like the Super Mario RPG 2, but I look at Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga as like
I agree.
That's like I view that as like the spiritual successor to Mario RPG more than Paper Mario.
Absolutely. It's more that was the timing of it. And yes. I mean, they're both the spiritual successors in characters and writing. But
yes, agreed.
But I agree that Mario and Luigi games are more they play more like Super Mario RPG, whereas Paper Mario, the mechanics vary. I mean, also Paper Mario game to Paper Mario game like violently differ. Like they are so incredibly different. Where the Mario
100%.
Luigi games build on each other and are mostly similar. And don't really change that much, just kind of grow and improve. They don't like wildly take big swings other than Paper Jam, which was a mess. But no, I totally get that.
Yeah. If I could, I have one more, Josh, about the visuals, about the zone that I like. And I just, because of what it did, I really like the Mushroom Kingdom in this game because it's the first time that we get any kind of like concrete sense of like what the Mushroom Kingdom actually is. Like we're told like, oh, Mushroom Kingdom. And we obviously know that Princess Toadstool has to like rule over something. We're constantly rescuing her. She is a princess and there are toads. And it's cool that we get to like see them and like their society and their civilization. That's something that I really love about Superstar too, is that the Mushroom Kingdom is like a physical place and you visit the neighboring kingdom, you visit the Beam Bean Kingdom. So I just like what it does in like fleshing out the world of Mario in general for this game in terms of the zones.
I just realized, just thinking about bringing it back to zones, I don't think I even said what my favorite zone was.
You should say that.
Yeah, Nimbus Land.
Nimbus Land is cool.
I love Nimbus Land.
It's
I loved it
cool.
in the original. I was so charmed by this cloud city and these cloud people, and I loved it. But we're running long on time. I want to move into our final section of the episode, and that is music. I know, Matt, you have some opinions. You have some strong opinions, and I will give you the floor. Take as much time as you would like to vent or talk about these opinions.
Sure. So I'll actually try and be concise, but I did write in our outline, Matt wants to discuss being old and cranky about why the SNES soundtrack is superior to the recompositions. Now, to be clear, though, this is a miracle upon a miracle because the original composer of Super Mario RPG was brought back to recompose all of the songs. So which does happen, but not often, and not with like this kind of crossover project. So that alone is a miracle, and so grateful for that. Also, the remake lets you switch between the original soundtrack and the recompositions, which is also great. I forced myself to listen to the recompositions. I had the SNES soundtrack for a while because I have a ton of brain memory for it, muscle memory for ears. Ears of muscle. Yeah, sure, let's go with that. But about like 2 hours into the game, I'm like, this is stupid. This is a new game. I should experience it like a new game. I can't talk about how I feel about these songs if I don't actually hear them. So then I played it with the recompositions, and in the context of the game, I thought they worked really well. But as time has passed, and as I've tried to listen to both soundtracks independent of the game, because I listen to the original Mario RPG soundtrack all the time, I had trouble listening to the recompositions devoid of the game. They just felt, it's back to these like impactful words. Like it felt like crunchy. It felt less like, I loved what the MIDI had to do on the Super NES, and it just, them being composed with, actual instruments and not a synthesizer, just felt so weird to me. I don't think they're bad, and I think if you have no context for the original soundtrack, these are excellent. But I think for me, I had kind of an old person yells at cloud moment, not the character, an actual cloud in the sky.
Nimbus Land. Yelled at Nimbus Land.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yelled at Malo.
You stupid fucking cloud.
But it's one of those things where it's like, I love the original soundtrack so much and listen to it so much that even trying to listen devoid of anything, the new one, I just can't do it. It's just not as good to me. And like an example of how like obsessive I am with the soundtrack, back before Spotify and streaming was the thing, so my favorite song in the entire game, hands down without question, is the remake of Bowser's fight theme from Super Mario Brothers 3, which is used for the Bowser fight in the castle at the beginning of the game in the original SNES version. It's one of my favorite songs in Mario history, and they redid it for this fight. And I loved it so much that as a kid, I would turn the game on, get to that fight, and then just leave the console on so I could listen to this song. Because
that's awesome.
When I was a kid, we didn't have Spotify. This wasn't even on CD. I had no way to listen to. We didn't have YouTube. I had no way to listen to this song unless I got the game to that point and just let it loop, which I would do because it's a turn-based battle. But like I love the soundtrack so much. We talked about so many songs already. Like the Forest Maze, I think, is one of the best songs in the game. For me, I remember like having nightmares about Belome as a kid because the sewer music is so spooky, and then he's this like unknown, weird looking character, and he speaks in riddles and talks about he's going to eat you like like a classic childhood boogeyman kind of character. And all of that was because of the music. I love this soundtrack, and I think again, my stance on it is an anomaly. I think the recompositions are masterfully done. I just think, to me, being so intimately familiar with the soundtrack, I think the only soundtrack I know better is Chrono Trigger. But besides that, this one I basically have memorized from start to finish. So like hearing anything different, I'm like, oh, well, that's off, because I'm also an audiophile. So like, to me, it doesn't sound like a remix or a remaster. It sounds like it's wrong, because I'm not hearing what I'm used to hearing, because some things are pitched up, some things sound smoother or softer. And there's nothing wrong with that. But for me, having like known this music as well as I do and being such a music nerd, it's just impossible for me to listen. But I do love that the remake does give you the option to switch back and forth literally whenever you want. I think that's really smart, and more remasters and remakes should do that, because like it's my favorite thing about the Halo 1 remake for the Master Chief Collection, that on a dime, push of a button, you can swap the graphics. The coolest thing to this day, that it's running both games at all times, and you could just swap between them basically. And so I like that kind of stuff, and this is like that. So that's my rant. But I think this has some of the best music in RPG history, and I will fight people. Like Chrono Trigger's number one to me, but like this is up there. This is definitely one of the best video game soundtracks ever made.
Oh my god! I mean, I don't think I could agree with you anymore. Like I do like the remake music a little bit more than you, but that's, I understand that a lot of that is nostalgia, and also you laid out some reasons for it. Like you kind of like the way that they had to quote unquote crunch it down, as you put it, to put it onto the Super Nintendo's sampler and everything. Like it does sound like, that's a crazy thing. I after you told me, before we recorded, that you can switch back to the original one, I was like, oh, really? So I checked it out. I'm like, and it still sounds good. Like it still works even with the modern visuals. The Forest Maze is one of my favorite pieces of music in the game, but also like I think Nimbus Land is that da 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 da, right? If I remember correctly, that gets stuck in my head easily. The Forest Maze specifically, like that song has stuck with me. How can I put this? So like I said, the last time I played it, before I played it for this show, was I played it like back in 2014. I might have listened to some podcasts. I think Singing Mountain from Drew Mackey. Drew Mackey is a great podcaster. He also has a podcast called The Gayest Episode Ever, I think. If that's one of I think, and it's all about like going through TV and finding, I'm gonna butcher it, but he's done stuff like that. He also, hold on, I'm going to look up his Blue Sky real quick to find out all the other cool shit that he does. But yeah, Gayest Episode Ever is one, and then Thrilling Tales of Video Games, which is like a blog that he writes about like video game history and stuff like that, which is cool. And just so I'll look it up later. Anyway, so check out both those things. But he put the Forest Maze music on one of his episodes. He had a video game music podcast called Singing Mountain. I've shouted it out before. Really wonderful video game music podcast. And ever since hearing it on that, I heard it maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. I would literally, like, after my daughter was born, once you got old enough to start to listen to music and like recognize it and stuff like that, we would play a silly game where I would hold her, like I would hold her like kind of like, fireman style, in both arms, and I would swing her back and forth to the rhythm of the Forest Maze, and like kind of like as the melody would swoop, I would kind of swoop her up and down and whatnot, and it was just this fun little game. So like it's weird to me even thinking back to this now, how prior to playing it for the show, how much this game has been intrinsically tied to fatherhood for me, which there's no parental, there's not like any parental emotions tied with this. It's just kind of like, it's now become this game where when I see this, I guess I'm literally coming to this conclusion right now, this realization now that it's been around fatherhood for me the entire time, which is just crazy. The last thing I want to say about the music before I throw it over to you, Eric, is I have a quote from Yoko Shimomura, and she won Lifetime Achievement last year at the Game Awards, correct? Or was it 2 years ago?
I don't.
Or maybe it was at the DICE Awards.
I'm not sure. It might be at the DICE Awards. I don't think they do a Lifetime Achievement thing at the Game Awards really yet.
Okay. Well, she got a Lifetime Achievement Award last year sometime. If you ever get a chance to watch her acceptance speech for it, like through the translator, I have never seen someone just so enthusiastic about how, like, so happy that people love her work. Like, it's not in an arrogant way either. Like, there's no arrogance whatsoever. It's just this, she's just so grateful, and she's so affable. That's the best way I can put it. Like, if you watch her acceptance speech, there's so much joy. And this quote from Yoko Shimomura back when this game was still being developed, you can see that enthusiasm even in this quote, where she says, Super Mario Bros. Was my first encounter with video games. I love the music of the Mario series. After I got assigned the job of writing the music for Super Mario RPG, I let my imagination run wild as I composed, trying to find sounds that fit with Mario walking around town, chatting people up, Mario sleeping, Mario just living life. It's been, and in caps, so much fun. We are still making some refinements, so I hope you look forward to it. And that quote, the only reason I wrote it down, like, normally that's just kind of like, to me, that's normally a nothing quote, because like every person working on a game, composer or otherwise, is going to say, yeah, I'm really jazzed about this, this, and this. But knowing kind of the context of like seeing Yoko Shimomura in how she kind of like presents herself, and then reading this quote, it added so much extra context of just the unbridled joy this woman just seems to have for video game music and composing for video games. It was just so cool to see.
That's awesome. I love that. Yeah, I think that it makes it special that she came back for this. Like, they could have had someone else do their own interpretations, and that would have been probably welcome on some level, right? Because that happens on a lot. That's pretty much how the remake games, this Final Fantasy VII remake games, are being done, right? Like, the original compositions are being used, but it's not just the one person. It's a team of folks reinterpreting these songs. But to bring her back and for her to be this excited, like, it's so cool. And she's easily one of my favorite composers, obviously. Now, of course, because I have to recall the name, I'm not going to remember the name of the composer for Chrono Trigger. It'll come back to me.
Yasunori Mitsuda.
Thank you. Like, besides Mitsuda though, like, I think she's one of my favorites, and her personality is part of that, because I've seen her do a bunch of interviews, and she's always, like, from when she first started to now, has always been this excited about the work she does, and I think that's incredible.
Real quick before Eric, you take it, you continue. Her Lifetime Achievement Award was at it was at GDC this year.
Oh, okay, there we go.
Sorry, this year as in 2024. This comes out in 2025.
Right? Yes. Timey-wimey.
Last year. Podcast time is so weird.
I know, right? But Eric, by all means, talk about the music in this game.
So yeah, it's probably no secret to anybody that is familiar with anything that I've done that Yoko Shimomura is my favorite video game composer of all time. And I've held very strong opinions with her. I believe her work rivals and demands the same respect of Nobuo Uematsu. I think
Agreed.
She's in that same,
absolutely.
I think she's in that same category. She was actually going to school to be trained for like a classical musician, but she had such a love of video games that she saw an ad for they were looking for music people at Capcom, and she sent some of her samples to Capcom, and she ended up getting hired there. And her family was like shocked that she was taking her musical training to go work in video games. I mean, if you just look at the breadth of her work, it's incredible. I mean, we have Final Fight, Street Fighter 2, an iconic soundtrack, Breath of Fire, Live Alive, Super Mario RPG, Parasite Eve, Legend of Mana, Kingdom Hearts, Mario and Luigi. Like, she's been involved with so many iconic soundtracks over the years. And I read a book that on the development of the entire Kingdom Hearts series, and has several conversation and experts from her. She credits Super Mario RPG with changing the trajectory of her career, because that was one of the first games she works on for Square, and then that would catapult her and going on to working, on Kingdom Hearts, on Final Fantasy and such. So this was a pivotal game in the career of Yoko Shimomura, and everything you guys said, I agree with. The Shimomura has this incredible ability that no matter what game she is writing music for, her music is able to enhance every single aspect of that game and make it better, whether it's combat, whether it's storytelling, whether it's just walking around and exploring the world. You see this time and time again with all the themes she writes for Kingdom Hearts, and the way that at every single emotional moment, story beat, battle, her music enhances those moments in such an incredible way. You can see it in this game. This is one of her greatest accomplishments for sure. This soundtrack is iconic. It is one of the most iconic Super Nintendo soundtracks. I would agree. Chrono Trigger, I think Mega Man X is fantastic. Like, there's some amazing soundtracks on the Super Nintendo. I do think I agree with both of you. I feel like I have a preference for the original just because I think her work is so iconic on that Super Nintendo sound chip that created so many just of the time amazing soundtracks. I think anything you would take from the Super Nintendo and try to redo, I don't think it would hit the same, especially for people like us who grew up with the system, because the music that came from the Super Nintendo was just, it was just of the time. It was so iconic for that system and the sound chip that they put into it. The fact that she came back to this game when they were remaking it, I'm super glad that they asked her, because I think she pours the same spirit into the modern compositions the same as she did for the old ones. But I mean, yeah, I could gush on and on about Yoko Shimomura for hours and hours. I love the work that she does. This soundtrack is one of her most iconic, and it's just a staple on a laundry list of iconic soundtracks that she has built up over her entire career. And she's done so many games. It's incomprehensible to me how one person could create so much iconic music. And I would say that it's had as much of an impact as if she would have gone into classical music. So yeah, Yoko Shimomura is fantastic. This soundtrack is fantastic. None of the tracks miss a beat. It's perfect for what it needs to be. And I'm glad Josh read that quote, because I think she nailed what she was trying to go for and figure out how everything would sound when Mario's walking around in the battle. I think it's perfect. I would agree that the Forest theme is probably most widely regarded as the most iconic track on this soundtrack, but I think there are so many. Some people get like a little tired of the battle theme because it is shorter and like it repeats and you're hearing it so often, but I honestly don't have an issue with that. I think I've certainly heard worse battle themes that are more annoying over the course of my video game career. Yeah, I'll shut up now. I fucking love Shimomura. I love this soundtrack.
I will say, like, to the battle theme, if it's a good battle theme, you're never bored of it, and I'm never really bored of the battle theme here. Although I will say the superior battle theme to me in this game is the when you fight any of the weapons, any of Smithy's gang. I love that theme. Yeah,
like the boss theme kind of. Yeah.
It's so good. But yeah, I agree. I think that that she is a legend, and this soundtrack is a great example of why she is a legend.
Yes.
Well, I think we have reached that point in the episode, y'all, that we're going to start wrapping this up. We've been going on for over 2 hours at this point. I might have to cut out some coughing from yours truly because a little behind the scenes, I'm getting over COVID. So if I sound a little nasally at points as well, it's probably because I just had a coughing fit that I deleted out. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, but now you're referencing it. So now can you really delete it out? Because now
you have to leave it in.
No, now it forces people to go back to listen to our wonderful conversation again.
Yeah,
and then
see if they can find
to
it. Yeah,
see if they can find it, right? But no, thank you both so much for joining me on this. This was a ton of fun. I loved our conversation about this game. I can't thank you both enough for joining me on this. So I want to throw it over to both of you for final thoughts. Matt, we'll start off with you, and then I'll go next, and Eric, you can have the final word, kind of in the same order I guess we did music, but whatever. I'm tired of trying to gamesmanship the speaking order here. But Matt, final thoughts on the game?
Sure. I mean, I was pretty upfront at the start of the episode about my love of this game. I think, like, is it a perfect RPG? No. But is anything perfect? Not really. If I were to say anything is perfect, it would be Chrono Trigger, my favorite game of all time. But like, even that's not. But I think this is the perfect first RPG for anyone who wants to start playing RPGs. If you have a love of Mario, even better. But I think this sets up the world enough that even you don't really know a ton about Mario, you know what's going on after the first 30 minutes to an hour anyway. It's a breeze on the Switch. It's like 13 hours, I think, and that was me like taking my time. Probably do it even faster than that. But I don't think there's a better package, like total package RPG. Like I said, there are some games that have come out recently that like give it a run for its money of like a favorite. But all of those games are doing what this game did. I mentioned Sea of Stars earlier. Sea of Stars has become one of my favorite RPGs of all time because it has an incredible soundtrack. It has timed hits and interesting mechanics, team up moves, all sorts of stuff that like my favorite games have had. I think there's no original game from my past that does it better than Mario RPG does as a total package. But yeah, I think that if you were looking for the complete package, if you are looking for a perfect RPG to start with, or a perfect Mario RPG specifically to start with, you can't get any better than this. There are other games that I think are better games overall because they add more, they build on, they get more complex, they feel more like a more dynamic RPG. But if you're looking for a starting point, there is no better starting point than Super Mario RPG. Unless you're Dave Jackson, who hates fun. Sorry, I had to throw one barb at him.
Shots fired.
I had to throw one barb at him. I know he's going to listen, and like he notoriously he doesn't hate Mario RPG, but he didn't love it. He doesn't love, from what I can tell based on what he's posted in the Discord, Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga. He doesn't hate them either. I just think it's funny to pick on him because he's an old man, and it's fun to pick on him.
Actually, you know what, Eric? You give your final thoughts first. I have a quote I want to kind of close out on.
Yeah, it's your show. You should have the final say. Yeah, I'll mirror everything. I'll mirror everything that Matt says, so I won't repeat any of that. I also just think from a video game history standpoint, I think this entry is fascinating because it was, for all intents and purposes, Mario's final game on the Super Nintendo. So I don't know if you ascribe anything to that. You know, it was the last Mario game put out on the Super Nintendo, but I think that's kind of cool and kind of poetic that it was this one. It's a game that marries Square's creativity with Nintendo's efficient execution. And I think it shows that in its package as an entirety. I think it's a utterly fascinating game from the late 90s era of video games, and it had implications for the relationship between Square and Nintendo moving forward that has only kind of in the last decade recovered to what it once used to be. So I think everything Matt said about the game, it's perfect for if you're trying to get into RPGs. And if you skip this one and have played like some of the Mario and Luigi games or Paper Mario, I think you would enjoy this one. I think it's worth seeing where that all began. So this is one of my favorite games of all time, one of my favorite soundtracks of all time. I think it's an utterly fascinating game for the time period it was made in, and I was utterly stunned that we got the remake of this game. It was something that I always thought about that I wanted, but I just never thought that they would do it. And I think it's really cool that they have. So if you're just looking for a nice casual RPG time, go and pick up the remake. It's not that bad. It really is the perfect Switch game. It's the perfect Switch RPG to just pick up and go and play on the go. You can pick it up, play it, make some progress, put it down. It's like perfect for the Switch. And I know they weren't thinking about the Switch when they designed it in 1996, but it translated so well to that experience. So yeah, go and check it out. This game is awesome. And don't listen to Dave.
I can't. There's just so much to love about this. I think what really gets me about this game, and the thing that I have made me fall in love with it, was just the vibes. Everything about this game is just it's so aesthetically pleasing to me, like from the visuals, from the music, from the writing, from the tone, everything about it, just it works so well together. And I think like it's such an interesting game to think about. Like, you know, when it came out, it was kind of like Square and Nintendo working together, and then shortly after they had that breakup, like we keep talking about. And it's just crazy that the breakup happened basically less than a year later, because Final Fantasy VII came out in 97 and this game came out in 96, you know? So it's just kind of crazy to see how fast that breakup occurred. But I do think that this game really set the template for what other Mario RPGs were going to be, not just in terms of like, like, oh, can Mario work as an RPG? This game showed that Mario could, but it was the fact that like so many of the things that this game kind of set has been carried forward, at least to my understanding. Like I said, I haven't played a lot of these yet. I'm working through them for the show. But like at least what I've played of the Paper Mario games and the Mario and Luigi games, the tone feels right at home with those. Like it feels like this is like their like season 1 of the type of writing style they were going to shoot for, and then seasons 2, 3, and onward, where they really kind of hone into their craft is the subsequent Mario games, Mario RPG games, whether it's Paper Mario or Mario and Luigi. And just the visuals, even like as much as I was making fun of kind of like the uncanny valleyness of some of the 3D models, I still really kind of enjoy them even on the Super Nintendo. I really love the remakes visuals. I recently guested. I mean, by the time this comes out, it'll be a couple months old. But I guested on Tokyo Game Life for Mono's Game of the Year episode. It's a wonderful tradition. He, for some reason, keeps inviting me back on for it because I always joke like his show is all Tokyo based. I'm like, I got nothing on that. I don't any excuse I can go on the show. So thank you. So I'm always grateful for him inviting me on. But I put this as my number 1 game of the year for 2024. Mario RPG was my number 1 game that I played this year. It like when I finished it. Yeah, sorry, last year. Last year. It was the number 1 game I played in 2024 though. It left such good feelings with me after I finished it. I was sad the game was over because I was just enjoying my time so much with it. Like I really enjoyed it, and I can't emphasize how much it just made me smile. I can't give a game a higher compliment that when I finish it, I just smile, like grinning like a dumb idiot from ear to ear. It was great. And the quote I want to close out on this on before we go into our final thoughts, or not final thoughts, I'm sorry, before our plugs. In 2014, the director Fujioka did an interview and where he's reminiscing on parts of the development of Super Mario RPG. And he goes into a couple things. I'm going to read a very short quote. He has a longer one shortly after where he talks about he worked on the set pieces and he drew a lot of the maps himself and they had some amazingly talented programmers. And they set up a base program for him to use so he can draw the maps. He scripted a bunch of scenes like the climb of Booster Hill and when you go down Midas River and stuff like that. But there's a quote at the very end where he goes, "Of all the things I worked on, I still think it's the best game I ever made."
Wow.
And I think that's a great way to wrap up this conversation. The director still considers it, at least as of 2014, that interview's 10 years old at the time we're recording this, 11 at the time this comes out. So who knows how things have changed. But at that time, he still thought it was the best game he ever made. So if you have not played Super Mario RPG, I highly recommend going to play it. Nothing we have said could spoil the experience, in my opinion. Like, it's just so wonderful from end to end. So that will do it for this episode of Still Loading. Thank you all so much for listening. And for my wonderful guests, Eric, Matt, thank you once again for joining me. Where can the good people find you online? What would you like to promote? Eric, I'm going to start off with you. What do you got going on?
So I host the Unlockables Podcast, which I bill as the story of video games, the people who play them, and the memories made along the way. If you want to find any of my socials, you can go on over to linktr.ee/Unlockables Podcast. I finally added Blue Sky, so you can find me on there. I finally kicked the old terrible X app, so I'm primarily on Blue Sky if you'd like to interact with me that way. Podcast Instagram's on there. Discord servers on there if you want to jump in, and I mostly use my Discord server for like people post funny memes sometimes, and then I just post when new episodes come out. It's not one of the more livelier Discords, but if you just want to keep up with what I'm doing and not feel pressure to like have to engage, my Discord is the place for you. And then I also have a Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/unlockables, and then I have a $1 and $3 tier that you can sign up and support. The $1 tier is if just like, hey, I want to support the show. I'll give you a couple extra goodies in there. You get a special little like Discord, you get a special role in the Discord, and then the $3 tier, you get some bonus episodes whenever I get around to putting those out. Of course, not mandatory. All the stuff I do on my show, all the stuff that people have come to know and love, like Guiding Keys and all the episodes I put out, stay in the main feed, free of charge, of course. So, just go and check that stuff out. And if you listen to one of the episodes, get in touch with me on social media, and we can talk about it.
All right. And Matt, what about you?
I promise to keep the pitch as short as possible. I just feel like I always, in my defense, in all the years I've been coming on folks' podcasts, I have less shows now, so it's shorter. But if you want to find out all the things that I'm doing, you can go to djstormageddon.com or link tr.ee/DJ_Stormageddon. Either or goes to my Linktree page where you can find Fun and Games, which is my broad topic-based podcast that I do with the incredible Jeff Moonen. We interview game developers, composers. We do retrospectives on consoles, genres, certain franchises. It's really just a celebration of games under the ethos that every video game is somebody's favorite. Let's celebrate them. We have a smaller, shorter show within the feed called Side Quests that airs every other Friday and every Monday. That is a different host every episode talking about a game they love and why they love it. Josh has done one episode, is working on a second. Eric has done two. It's really just a great way to share positivity about games we love. You can critique them in your episode, but really the goal is to just share from the heart about a game that's really special to you, regardless of what the broader public feels of the quality is, high, low, or indifferent. I also do a play-along podcast called Reignite. It started as a Mass Effect podcast. We did the original trilogy, me and my incredible co-host Frankie Bradley Lestrange. We then moved on to a Mass Effect Andromeda, which I had never played before, played for the first time for the show, ended up really liking it, flaws and all. And now we have, of course, made the natural evolution to Dragon Age. We are currently playing our way through Dragon Age 2, but we are actually timely as a podcast as of when we're recording, but not by the time you hear this. Dragon Age The Veilguard has just come out, and so we talk a little bit about that as well. And we will eventually do a full season on it when we get to it in like 4 years. If you want to support me, there are a ton of ways. Fun and Games has its own Patreon. We have a $3, $5, and $10 level. $3 level is just your love and adoration, and our love and adoration right back. At the $5 and $10 levels, you're going to get bonuses, unedited episodes, articles. There's a ton of free stuff too. We have a free tier. You can also do a 7-day trial of the $10 tier and listen to 2 years worth of monthly bonus podcasts in like 7 days if you want to really do that and then cancel it before you have to pay anything. That's why we have it there if you want to just binge on podcasts and get annoyed by my voice, I suppose. I have a merch store also on my page. We have a Discord for my podcast network, Certain POV, which has TV podcasts, comic book podcasts, other video game podcasts, like just a ton of stuff. So if you want to join a nerdy community that doesn't like overwhelm with thousands and thousands of users, we have a nice small community that's really supportive. Lots of other creators and artists there too. Definitely worth coming and hanging out. And if you want to find me on social, the best place is Blue Sky right now. I'm DJ Stormageddon with no underscore there. I'm not on Twitter anymore because fuck Twitter. And I think that's it. That's all I got. I think that might be my fastest one yet. But don't time it.
Not to correct you, Matt, I've actually done 2 side quests. I did Donkey Kong 64 and Power Pete.
Oh, that's right. I keep forgetting about Power Pete because it's fucking Power Pete. But
because like no one knows that game except
but you
for
made
me.
Jeff's day because a slight tangent really quick at the end. When I first met Josh and was bringing him on the show, it's before we'd really collaborated before, but he really wanted to do Power Pete. And Jeff, who has now met you before, but hadn't at the time, only knew that you had done Power Pete and was so excited because he loves Power Pete and no one ever talks about Power Pete. So
no one knows about that game, man. It is a hidden gem, and I think more people should discover it. That's why I did that whole episode with Phil Salvador from the Video Game History Foundation.
Yeah.
For myself, you can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, Threads. I have so much muscle memory of just saying Twitter. I'm not on Twitter anymore as well. I mean, you can follow me if you want to. The account's locked. It's at Still Loading Pod there, as well as all the other locations I mentioned, Blue Sky, Twitter. Oh my God. Fucking A. Blue Sky, Instagram, Threads. I'm also on Twitch. I always forget to do this. I should do this more often. I do stream on Twitch. I try to stream about twice a week on Tuesday and Saturday nights around 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Tuesday nights I'm over at it's a whole other thing. You can see it online if you want to. But I definitely stream on Saturday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you want to support the show, you can do so in a few ways. Probably the easiest way, and it only takes a few moments of your time. Give it a 5-star rating or review, not just for my show, but for all my wonderful guest shows as well. I know that's asking a lot, so just focus on theirs if you want to pick one or two. But it really does help us a lot. It helps more people find the show, and it pleases the algorithm gods, or so I'm told. So it would really mean a lot to us if you gave it a 5-star rating review on whichever app you use, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever you got. But I also have a Patreon. If you like the show a lot and you want to support it monetarily, patreon.com/stillloadingpod. For $1 a month, you get all the episodes a little bit earlier with better audio quality, as well as access to patron voting rights, which I do quarterly polls to help guide the direction of the show. And at the beginning of the year, I do a big backlog month poll where I put 16 games up, and the top 4 games with the most votes will get chosen for a big backlog month series. Last year's winners were Donkey Kong Country, Final Fantasy VII Dirge of Cerberus, Toe Jam and Earl, and The Order 1886. And I'm excited to find out which games win this year, which at the time of recording this has not been posted, but I guess the time this releases, it will have already been decided. But there was still quarterly polls, so that's all at $1 a month. For $3 a month, you get all the perks I mentioned before, the $1 tier plus patron shoutouts, which you heard at the beginning of this episode. You may have heard Matt's name at the beginning of this episode. For $4 a month, you get everything I mentioned prior, plus access to bonus episodes, mini bonus episodes that cover a variety of different topics, sometimes news. Lately, I've been doing a D&D session with some friends, and I've been covering the story and the events of what's happening in our D&D session, our D&D campaign in there. So stuff like that. And then finally, for $5 a month, you get everything at the previous tiers, plus access to my monthly movie podcast, which at the time which right now is called Still Family, my monthly Fast and Furious podcast, where all the guests who join me aren't just friends, they're family. And that's it, though. That's all I got for y'all. That is everything. It's a very long-winded plug of everything you can get at the Patreon, which goes against all rules of advertising, but I don't know how the fuck to truncate that shit down. So that's it. Patreon.com/stillloadingpod. That's all the time I got for you for this episode of Still Loading. This is what a kickoff for Mario Month. Thank you all for joining us. And Matt, Eric, thank you once again for joining me on this episode.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, always a pleasure to visit the Still Loading podcast.
And with all that said, listeners, I will see you all next time.